In the face of certain death, 300 Spartan warriors made a stand that would echo through the ages. What drove these men to sacrifice everything for their homeland, and how did their courage reshape the course of history? The sun hung low over the ancient Greek world, casting long shadows across a land that had known both peace and war in equal measure. For centuries, the Greek city-states had flourished, each fiercely independent, each with its own way of life, but bound together by a shared language and culture. In the south, Sparta stood as the epitome of military might, a land of warriors forged in the fires of discipline, honor, and relentless training. The Spartan way was simple: strength, loyalty, and sacrifice. From the moment a boy was born, his life was dedicated to the state, to the art of war. The men of Sparta were warriors, trained to fight, to lead, and to die for their land. The concept of fear was foreign to them, as they had been raised to face death with unflinching courage. While Sparta prided itself on its military prowess, the rest of Greece was not far behind. Athens, with its philosophers and intellectuals, had grown powerful through its naval strength. Corinth, Thebes, and Argos each commanded respect in their own right. Yet despite their rivalry, the Greek city-states had lived in relative isolation from the storms that raged beyond the Mediterranean. The Persian Empire, however, was a force unlike any other. A vast, sprawling empire that stretched from the Indus River to the shores of the Aegean, Persia had long cast a shadow over the known world. Its king, Xerxes, had ascended to the throne with grand ambitions, determined to expand his dominion across all of Europe. The first whispers of the Persian threat were met with skepticism in Greece. For years, the Persians had made their way westward, conquering city after city, nation after nation, yet no one had ever dared to challenge the might of Persia directly. But with Xerxes on the throne, the tides of fate had begun to shift. His enormous army, estimated at hundreds of thousands, was a force that could not be ignored. The Persian king had set his eyes on Greece, and he intended to bring the proud Greek city-states to their knees. In response, the Greeks began to prepare. Their unity, however, was fragile. Athens and Sparta, long rivals, would have to put aside their differences to stand against the growing Persian menace. The warriors of Sparta knew that a threat of this magnitude could not be ignored. As the Persian Empire advanced, Greece braced itself for the storm that was about to break, and no one knew it better than the 300 Spartans, who would soon stand alone against the overwhelming force of the Persian horde. The echoes of war grew louder, and the world held its breath, for the day of reckoning was fast approaching. Xerxes stood at the helm of the Persian Empire, a vast kingdom that stretched from the fertile plains of Mesopotamia to the distant mountains of India. As the son of Darius, the great king who had attempted to subdue Greece years before, Xerxes inherited a realm that was both grand and ancient, steeped in tradition and boundless in ambition. He had watched his father's campaigns falter and the mighty Persian forces retreat, humiliated by the spirited Greek resistance. The defeat at Marathon had not only bruised the pride of Persia, but had lit a fire within Xerxes, a fire that would consume any doubts about his own power and destiny. Determined to avenge his father's loss and fulfill his vision of Persian supremacy, Xerxes set out to build an army the world had never seen. His father's vast forces were nothing compared to what he envisioned. Xerxes commanded his generals, his satraps, to muster soldiers from every corner of his empire, from the lands of Egypt to the heart of Asia, from the steppes of Scythia to the ancient cities of Mesopotamia. He gathered warriors, thousands of men, from countless nations, tribes, and cultures, marched toward the heart of Persia. His army would be a true reflection of the empire's vast reach, a melting pot of the East, each soldier a cog in the immense machinery of war that Xerxes was determined to set in motion. Xerxes' ambition went beyond revenge. He saw himself not merely as the king of Persia, but as the ruler of the world. His empire, already immense, would stretch farther than any empire before it, bringing even Greece to its knees. The Persian navy swelled with ships, the ranks of his infantry thickened, and a devastating arsenal of weapons and siege engines was created. Xerxes intended to crush Greece, wipe it from the map, and cement his legacy as the greatest ruler of all time. But the scale of his ambition also carried with it immense challenges. His armies, numbering in the hundreds of thousands, would have to march across treacherous lands, endure harsh climates, and face the stubborn resistance of the Greeks. Yet, Xerxes was undeterred. The ambition to conquer, to expand his father's empire and prove his own might, drove him relentlessly forward. The Persian Empire had reached its zenith under Darius, but under Xerxes, it would either break through the barriers of history or be consumed by its own grandiosity. As the preparations for war escalated, Xerxes stood on the precipice of his destiny. The world would soon witness the full force of his empire, an empire that, for all its splendor, had never been so far from its origins. And now, as Xerxes looked westward, across the narrow strait separating Persia from Greece, he knew that the time for conquest was upon him. The storm would come, and with it, a test of the empire's strength that would shake the very foundations of the ancient world. As word spread of the Persian threat, the Greek city-states, once divided by their own rivalries and jealousies, were forced to consider a bitter but necessary truth. Survival required unity. Athens, with its naval supremacy, and Sparta, with its unmatched warriors, stood at the heart of this fragile coalition. Yet, even in the face of a common enemy, the old tensions between the city-states simmered beneath the surface. The alliance, born of necessity rather than camaraderie, was far from harmonious. Sparta, with its austere warrior culture and rigid discipline, viewed Athens with suspicion. The Athenians, in turn, resented what they saw as Sparta's elitism and conservative tendencies. Their contrasting styles of warfare, Sparta's focus on land battles and Athens' naval prowess, created friction, but both sides knew that this was a fight they could not afford to lose. In the face of Xerxes' vast and unstoppable forces, the Greeks reluctantly set aside their differences, understanding that no single city could stand against the might of Persia alone. The alliance began to form, not out of trust or friendship, but out of raw pragmatism. The Athenian navy, quick and agile, would strike against Persia's fleet. The Spartan infantry, the backbone of Greece's military might, would hold the line on land. The rest of Greece, though smaller in numbers and resources, pledged what they could: soldiers, supplies, and the spirit of their defiant culture. The unity was tenuous at best, a delicate web woven from the threads of desperation and fear. The ancient rivalry between Athens and Sparta, once a rivalry of ideals, democracy versus oligarchy, naval power versus land power, was now overshadowed by the looming threat of Xerxes' advancing empire. Despite the mutual distrust, leaders like Themistocles, the Athenian general, and Leonidas, the Spartan king, understood that their cities' differences would need to be set aside, if only temporarily, to face the Persian onslaught. Even as they discussed strategy, there was little doubt that the alliance was fragile, and the Greeks would fight not for the glory of one city, but for the survival of their shared way of life. Greece's fractured identity would prove to be both its weakness and its strength. While the city-states had never truly united under one banner, their shared love of freedom, their devotion to their gods, and their common history of defying foreign invaders created a foundation for resistance. The challenge of uniting these disparate states into an effective fighting force was immense. Ancient prejudices and political rivalries ran deep, but so too did the Greek pride. As the Persian threat grew ever closer, there was no time left for hesitation. If they did not fight together, they would surely fall divided. The flames of a common cause flickered to life, fragile but burning bright. Yet the road ahead would demand sacrifice, unity, and, perhaps above all, the courage to overcome centuries of division. As the Persian army advanced like an unstoppable tide, the Greeks turned to the oracle of Delphi, hoping for guidance in their darkest hour. The ancient temple stood at the heart of Greece's spiritual world, its priestess known for her cryptic prophecies. When consulted by the Greek leaders, the oracle offered a chilling vision. The wooden walls will save you. The words, laden with ambiguity, stirred a sense of unease. The prophecy, though undoubtedly important, offered no clear solution. Was the wooden wall a metaphor for Athens' naval power, or did it refer to something else? The priests of Delphi, guarded in their interpretations, left the leaders more puzzled than reassured. In Athens, the message was met with a mixture of hope and anxiety. The city's fleet, made of towering ships, had been its salvation in past wars, but the prophecy was no clear promise. Could these wooden walls hold the key to survival, or was it a riddle masking a more perilous truth? For Themistocles, the Athenian general who believed in the power of the navy, the prophecy felt like a divine confirmation of his strategy. If the oracle spoke of the fleet, then it was time to fight on the water, to engage Persia at sea. But for others, uncertainty lingered. Some feared the prophecy foretold nothing more than a false hope, leading them into disaster. In Sparta, the response was more cautious. King Leonidas, steadfast and resolute, regarded the oracle's words with suspicion. The prophecy offered no direct guidance on the land, and the Spartan warriors, legendary for their discipline, were used to facing foes head-on, with swords and shields. They were warriors of the earth, not the sea, yet even they could not ignore the significance of the prophecy. If the oracle truly spoke of the future, they would have to respect its words, even if their meaning was unclear. Could a wooden wall provide salvation when the might of the Persian army loomed on the horizon? As the leaders gathered, a sense of foreboding filled the air. The prophecy had brought no clarity, but only more questions. The Greeks, already divided by their rivalries and differences, now had to wrestle with their own doubts. Would the wooden walls truly save them, or was this an omen of doom? Each leader, from Themistocles to Leonidas, grappled with the heavy burden of uncertainty. The prophecy had offered a ray of hope, but it also cast a shadow over the Greeks' preparations. It was a moment where faith in the gods, in the oracle, and in their own strategies all collided, and the hearts of the Greek leaders were torn between courage and fear. In their private moments, doubt crept into their minds. What if the prophecy was wrong? What if it was leading them to a tragic end? But even as the doubts loomed, there was no turning back. The winds of war were already stirring, and the fate of Greece rested on the fragile hope that, somehow, the oracle's words would hold the key to their survival. King Leonidas of Sparta stood firm in the face of the overwhelming Persian threat. His eyes, hard and determined, reflected the resolve that had made Sparta a symbol of warrior culture. As Persia's vast army moved relentlessly toward Greece, the king took command of the unified Greek forces, knowing the weight of history rested on his shoulders. The Greeks, despite their differences, had come together under his leadership, realizing that their survival depended on a single, united front. Leonidas knew that the Greek city-states, each with their own rivalries and ambitions, had only one chance to stand against the Persian juggernaut. The Greek forces, though formidable in their own right, were far outnumbered, and the thought of facing Xerxes' immense army was enough to make even the most seasoned warriors pause. But in Leonidas's heart, there was no hesitation. He understood the stakes of this battle not just for Sparta, but for all of Greece. He was not simply fighting to defend his city-state. He was fighting for the very soul of Greek independence. The Spartan king's vision was clear. To hold the pass at Thermopylae, a narrow strip of land between the mountains and the sea, where the Persian numbers could be limited, and the Greek hoplites, heavily armoured and disciplined, would have the advantage. Leonidas knew that this was where he could make a stand. He chose his men carefully, selecting only the bravest, those who understood the meaning of sacrifice. 300 Spartan warriors, bound by the unbreakable code of their warrior society, stood with him, ready to defend Greece at any cost. In this narrow pass, they would fight, not only for survival, but for the very essence of their identity. His call to arms was not without sacrifice. Leonidas knew that this would likely be a last stand, a battle that could cost him and his men their lives. But his spirit remained unyielding. He did not ask for victory, he asked only that they hold their ground, to resist, to make the Persian conquest as costly as possible. His leadership was defined by his unwavering commitment to his men and his country. He did not send them to die, but rather to show the world the meaning of honour, courage, and defiance against tyranny. As he surveyed his troops, Leonidas could sense the weight of his decision. The sacrifices they would make here would echo across history, a symbol of resistance to foreign invasion. His determination was matched only by his belief that, no matter the outcome, they had to fight. They had to hold Thermopylae. The fate of Greece was in their hands. In the days leading up to the battle at Thermopylae, the Spartan warriors underwent preparation unlike any other. It was not merely a matter of sharpening weapons or donning armour, it was a ritual that defined their very existence. Each Spartan soldier was the product of a lifetime of discipline and endurance, honed from childhood to embrace the harsh realities of war. Their training began at the agoge, a brutal system that shaped every Spartan into a relentless force on the battlefield. They were not just warriors. They were embodiments of Sparta's unyielding will. The soldiers knew that to face the Persian onslaught, they needed not only strength but also perfect unity. The Spartan way of life, which valued collective discipline over individual desire, had prepared them for this moment. It was a life that had conditioned them to fight as a single, unbroken unit, where every soldier knew his place in the formation, every move had purpose, and every man trusted his comrades with his life. Their shields were not just pieces of armour, they were symbols of the bond between them, the bond that would hold them together as they faced impossible odds. Strategy, too, was a key element of their preparation. The narrow pass at Thermopylae, where they would make their stand, played into the Spartans' strengths. Their phalanx formation, a dense wall of shields and spears, was designed to be impenetrable. In that confined space, the massive Persian numbers would be rendered useless. The Spartan soldiers knew that it was not brute force they needed, but precision, coordination, and an unshakable will to endure. The strategy was simple: stand firm, fight as one, and make every Persian advance costly. Yet, the Spartan preparation extended beyond the warriors themselves. Spartan women, often overlooked in historical accounts, played an equally vital role. While the men were at war, the women of Sparta held the fort at home, embodying the same strength and discipline that defined their male counterparts. They were the backbone of the Spartan state, maintaining the economy and ensuring that their children grew up with the same warrior spirit that ran through their father's veins. When Leonidas bid farewell to his soldiers, it was not only his comrades who sent him off with pride, it was also the Spartan women whose strength was reflected in their stoic support of the men who would face death on the battlefield. Their role was not merely passive, they were Spartan warriors in their own right, shaping the society that would stand against the Persian tide. In those final moments before the battle, the men prepared with a deep sense of purpose, knowing that they would give everything for their city-state, for their comrades, and for the future of Greece. Their preparation was not just physical, it was a culmination of generations of discipline, pride, and sacrifice. The hour of reckoning was upon them, and they stood ready, Xerxes' army moved like a vast, unstoppable wave, its relentless march towards Greece echoing through the lands they crossed. The Persian king had assembled an unprecedented force, one that seemed to defy the very limits of what any army could be. From all corners of his empire, warriors and mercenaries had gathered, swelling his ranks to an astonishing number. The Persian forces stretched as far as the eye could see, a sea of soldiers with no end in sight. It was said that the earth shook beneath their heavy tread, and the sky darkened with the dust of their advance. At the front of the Persian war machine were the foot soldiers, the backbone of Xerxes' army. These men, clad in a patchwork of armor from various regions, formed a massive line of spears and shields. Many of them were not Persian by birth, but had been drawn from the vast expanse of Xerxes' empire, representing a range of cultures, each with their own fighting traditions. Despite their diverse origins, they had been molded into a single, formidable force. Behind them, the cavalry rode with purpose, their horses powerful and swift, ready to strike where the foot soldiers could not reach. These mounted units brought speed and agility, able to flank or pursue with terrifying effectiveness. Perhaps the most fearsome of all were the war elephants, towering beasts from the east that lumbered forward, each carrying a howdah bristling with archers or javelin throwers. The sight of them sent waves of dread through their enemies. With their immense size and strength, the elephants seemed to symbolize the overwhelming might of the Persian Empire itself. Their advance was slow but steady, crushing anything that dared stand in their way. As the Persian army pressed on, it was clear that this was no ordinary campaign. It was a demonstration of the empire's vast resources and its king's unyielding ambition. The sheer scale of the force, with its multiple layers of warriors, cavalry, and elephants, was designed to overrun and overwhelm any opposition. The Persian war machine was a terrifying sight, one that promised nothing short of total devastation. Xerxes, atop his golden chariot, watched as his army moved steadily forward, each step bringing him closer to his goal, the subjugation of Greece. His mind must have raced with thoughts of glory, of the vast empire he would expand, and of the resistance that awaited him at the narrow pass of Thermopylae. But in his eyes there was no doubt. With an army of this size, no force on earth could stand against him. As his troops advanced, it was not just a military campaign, it was the triumph of Persian power, destined to sweep away all who stood in its path. The Greeks, with their warriors at Thermopylae, would soon see the might of the Persian machine unleashed in its full, terrifying force. Xerxes' army had reached the edge of the known world, standing at the precipice of the Hellespont, a body of water separating Asia from Europe. The crossing was a monumental feat, one that would cement Xerxes' reputation as a ruler whose ambitions knew no bounds. But the task was not one easily accomplished. The Hellespont, stretching between Asia Minor and the Greek mainland, was a formidable barrier, and the Persian king knew that without a way to cross, his massive army would be halted at the threshold of Greece. In an astounding display of engineering prowess, Xerxes ordered his engineers to build a bridge of boats that would span the water. Hundreds of ships, their hulls lashed together, formed a temporary crossing. Cables were strung, anchors dropped, and the bridge was reinforced with planks to withstand the pressure of the army's passage. The sheer scale of this operation was enough to inspire awe across the Persian Empire. The Hellespont had been conquered by the will of one man, and it was a symbol of his determination to carry his forces into the heart of Europe. But nature had its say. A fierce storm swept through the waters, smashing the bridge into pieces and leaving the army stranded on either side. For Xerxes, it was a humiliation that threatened to tarnish his carefully constructed image of invincibility. In a rage, he ordered the waters of the Hellespont to be whipped, to punish the sea for its defiance. It was a dramatic act of fury, one that only fueled the myth of his grandeur and the belief that no obstacle, not even nature itself, could stand in his way. Undeterred, Xerxes commanded the bridge be rebuilt. This time, a sturdier crossing was constructed, and it was under this structure that the Persian army finally crossed the Hellespont. Stepping onto European soil, the soldiers marched in tight formation, with their horses and chariots following in lockstep. It was as if Xerxes was not merely crossing a river, but sweeping aside the barriers between himself and the destiny he believed was his. The Greek world stood just beyond the horizon, its fate uncertain. As the massive Persian force poured onto Greek soil, the tension grew palpable. The Greek homeland, once thought to be distant and safe, was now under direct threat. Xerxes' forces were relentless, their sheer numbers and unmatched firepower pressing forward with one goal: the destruction of Greece. And as the Persian army moved closer, the ancient land of the Greeks stirred, preparing for the conflict that would soon erupt in the narrow passes and fields that had long been the stage for heroic deeds. The march across the Hellespont had marked the beginning of the end for Greece's independence. The fate of the Greek city-states now hung in the balance. The Greek leaders gathered in the heart of the ancient world, their faces grave, their voices thick with the weight of impending war. The council convened in the shadow of a crisis, as the unstoppable force of Xerxes' army loomed on the horizon, threatening to sweep through Greece like a wildfire. It was a time for unity, yet the council chamber buzzed with discord. Representatives from Athens, Sparta, Corinth, and the other city-states argued over strategy, each man keen to protect his own interests and priorities. The Athenians, ever the diplomats, suggested that their superior naval power could turn the tide. They believed the Persian fleet was vulnerable and that a decisive naval engagement could cripple Xerxes' campaign. Their plans revolved around luring the Persian fleet into the narrow straits near Salamis, where the speed and maneuverability of the Greek ships could offset the size of the Persian vessels. The strategy was sound, but the Athenians, focused on the sea, were less concerned with the land. Their desire to protect their city, their art, and their culture outweighed the pressing need to engage Xerxes' army on the battlefield. The Spartans, however, held a very different view. They were warriors to the core, trained from childhood in the art of war. King Leonidas, their leader, was a man of iron will and unshakable resolve. His soldiers were the finest fighters in Greece, but they were few in number, and the odds were stacked against them. Leonidas knew the importance of the land. He argued that a battle at the narrow pass, at Thermopylae, where the mountain met the sea, offered the Greeks the best chance of holding back the Persian tide. The narrowness of the pass would negate the numerical advantage of Xerxes' vast army, forcing his soldiers into close combat where the Greeks could fight with their superior tactics and discipline. But not all the Greek leaders were convinced. Some of the smaller city-states feared the Spartan plan was a doomed sacrifice. They questioned whether they should risk their best soldiers in a fight that might end in death for all. Others, notably the Corinthians, argued that the Athenians' naval strategy offered a less costly option. Disagreements over the timing of the battle and the distribution of resources intensified. There was talk of fleeing to the islands or abandoning their cities, should the worst come to pass. Yet as the days passed and Xerxes' army inched closer, the realities of their situation became impossible to ignore. The Greeks could not afford disunity. The pass at Thermopylae had to be held, and Leonidas's conviction began to sway the council. His plan was audacious, but it was also the only hope Greece had to stall the Persian advance. With no clear consensus but a growing sense of urgency, the Greek leaders reluctantly agreed. The die was cast. They would stand at Thermopylae, a small band of warriors against a sea of enemies. The council had spoken, though with much hesitation, and the fate of Greece was now in the hands of its bravest soldiers. The sun hung low in the sky as the Greek forces began their march toward the pass of Thermopylae, the final chokehold between the mighty Persian army and the heart of Greece. The soldiers, tired from days of travel, trudged along the narrow roads, their feet heavy with the weight of the task before them. The air was thick with the scent of dust and sweat, and the silence among the ranks was broken only by the occasional murmur of soldiers, whispering of the battle to come. The journey, though short, felt endless. There was a sense of unease that hung over the Greeks, a growing realization that they were about to face an enemy unlike any they had ever fought. Xerxes' forces, stretching as far as the eye could see, were an ocean of men, cavalry, war elephants, and the weight of an empire. For many of the soldiers marching with Leonidas, the outcome seemed inevitable. Fear began to seep into their hearts, and doubts crept into their minds. Would they be enough to stop the Persian tide? Would the strength of their resolve be enough to hold the narrow pass long enough for their city-states to prepare? There were whispers among the ranks of retreat, of abandoning the pass and fleeing to safety, but those voices were few. It was in these moments of doubt that Leonidas stood firm. His presence was like a rock, unwavering and resolute, cutting through the uncertainty like a blade. The king of Sparta knew that the survival of Greece rested on the outcome of this battle. His leadership was not just of words, but of actions. He had led them to this point, and now it was his unwavering resolve that would carry them through the storm. As they neared Thermopylae, the narrow, rocky cliffs began to loom ahead, a natural fortress against the Persian onslaught. Leonidas, with his commanders, surveyed the land, calculating the best positions for his men. His soldiers watched him carefully, sensing his confidence, his refusal to yield in the face of overwhelming odds. He spoke to them not in grand speeches, but in simple, direct words. He reminded them of the duty they carried not just to their families and city-states, but to the very idea of Greece itself. The rest of the world would know them by their courage, by their sacrifice. In this place, they would stand as an example of defiance, no matter the cost. But even Leonidas, unflinching as he was, could not ignore the vastness of the threat before them. It was a weight upon his heart, one that he did not show to his men, but one he carried alone. His thoughts often drifted to the faces of his warriors, his soldiers, his brothers, and he knew this would not be the glorious battle they had been trained for. There would be no retreat, no victory beyond this pass. The finality of it settled over him like a shadow, yet he stood taller, his resolve strengthened. By the time they reached Thermopylae, there was no more talk of fear. The soldiers of Greece had found their courage, inspired by the steadfastness of their leader. The pass, a place of legend, would soon be their battleground, and they would face it together as one united force, ready to defend their homes, their lives, and their way of life. The pass at Thermopylae stretched before the Greeks like a natural fortification, its jagged cliffs rising on either side, narrowing the approach to a mere few meters wide. It was a place where the might of the Persian army would have to face the narrow confines of nature itself, a chokehold where numbers mattered little, and the courage of the soldiers would make all the difference. The ground beneath their feet was rocky, uneven, a mix of loose stone and hardened earth, and the air carried the scent of salt from the nearby sea. The narrowness of the pass meant that the Persian forces, with their overwhelming numbers, would not be able to fully deploy, and the Greeks knew this was their only chance. Leonidas and his men took to the terrain with the precision of seasoned warriors. The Spartans, along with a few thousand other Greek soldiers, began to form their defensive lines along the most strategic points, positioning themselves behind the steep cliffs on either side, which would act as a shield against the Persian cavalry. The soldiers' shields were interlocked, their spears pointed outward, and every man took his place with unwavering discipline. It was clear that their survival depended on the strength of their unity, and for the moment, there was no doubt in their hearts. The Greek soldiers moved with a practiced calmness, not rushing, but steadily preparing for the battle that was sure to come. Behind them, the smaller contingent of troops from other Greek city-states formed their own defensive lines, while the archers and slingers made their final adjustments. The air was thick with tension, the kind that comes before an immense storm, and in the distance, a low rumble began to rise. It was the sound of the Persian army. The first glimpse of the Persians came from the farthest edge of the pass, where the Greek scouts spotted a cloud of dust rising on the horizon. The sun, low and unrelenting, cast long shadows over the land, and soon the outline of the Persian forces began to appear, a sea of soldiers stretching as far as the eye could see. The Greeks had prepared themselves for this moment, but nothing could quite prepare them for the sheer size of what was approaching. It was a relentless tide, marching forward with an almost hypnotic rhythm, a mass of spears, shields, and war machines. Xerxes' army, a monstrous force of more than 200 men, loomed like a dark cloud. Behind the soldiers came the cavalry, the war elephants, beasts larger than anything the Greeks had ever seen, each one carrying an intimidating weight of weaponry and soldiers alike. The sound of their march was deafening, and the dust choked the very air. The earth itself seemed to tremble under the weight of their numbers, and the Greeks, standing firm in their narrow pass, could only watch as the Persian war machine advanced. The reality of the battle began to settle in like a cold, unyielding weight. The Greeks knew their chances were slim, but as the massive Persian army drew closer, they also knew one thing they would not break. They had the pass, they had their courage, and they would fight. The first Persian scouts arrived at the edge of Thermopylae in the early hours, their swift horses kicking up clouds of dust as they rode along the narrow trails leading toward the Greek lines. With the weight of the Persian war machine behind them, these scouts had little trouble assessing the situation, for they had seen countless battlegrounds before. The Greek army, though skilled and disciplined, appeared like a speck in the face of the vast force that Xerxes had assembled. A few thousand men stood in defense of the pass, dwarfed by the swelling tide of Persian soldiers who filled the surrounding lands as far as the eye could see. To the scouts, it was a ridiculous sight, such a small force preparing to stand against the greatest military might the world had ever known. The scouts rode back to Xerxes' camp with reports of the Greek numbers, their voices full of disbelief at the courage or folly of the Greek resistance. A small force, led by a king of Sparta, had chosen to face a flood of Persian soldiers with such grim resolve. The idea that the Greeks could hope to stop them with so few men seemed absurd. In the Persian camp, where victory was all but assured, Xerxes remained confident, his eyes never wavering from the scale of his triumph. He sat in his royal tent, surrounded by generals, advisors, and courtiers, his posture one of unwavering command. As the scouts presented their findings, Xerxes smiled, confident that the Greeks, too weak and poorly prepared, would fall before his massive army. "They believe they can stop us with this?" he asked, gesturing toward the reports and the small force depicted on the maps, laughing softly to himself. "This is nothing more than a nuisance." His voice was calm, a man speaking to his subjects as though he were the absolute master of all the land. The idea of a small, determined group standing in the face of such an overwhelming force seemed almost laughable to Xerxes. He could already see the end of the battle in his mind. His army would sweep through the pass like a flood through a dam, washing away the Greeks with no resistance to slow them down. But beneath that veneer of confidence, Xerxes had a hint of caution, a subtle unease that gnawed at the edges of his mind. He had heard of the Spartan warriors before, stories of their legendary courage, of their relentless discipline, and of their uncompromising will to fight. Yet, as his advisors reassured him, he dismissed these thoughts quickly, convinced that no matter how fierce the Spartans were, they could never withstand the weight of his army. Xerxes gave the command to proceed, certain of victory, but aware that the Greeks had chosen their ground carefully. The pass, after all, was narrow, and there was a possibility the Greeks might slow his army's advance. But as the Persian forces continued their march, Xerxes remained assured that numbers alone would carry the day. The Greeks, for all their bravery, could never overcome the might of the Persian Empire. In the days leading up to the battle at Thermopylae, the warriors of Sparta stood ready, their minds focused and their bodies honed to perfection. The Spartan ethos, built on loyalty, discipline, and honor, had shaped them into the finest fighting force the world had ever known. From an early age, boys were trained to endure hardships, to fight without hesitation, and to sacrifice everything for their city-state. It was not merely a lifestyle, it was a creed, one that defined their very existence. Leonidas, their king, embodied this philosophy in every word, every action. He moved through the ranks of his soldiers, speaking to them in a manner that stirred the depths of their Spartan souls. Remember, we fight for Sparta, for our wives and children, for our homes. It is not death we face, but dishonor. Stand firm, for we are the shield of Greece. If we fall, let our bravery be the spark that lights the fire of freedom. His voice carried the weight of generations of Spartan warriors, of fathers and sons who had stood in battle before them. The men around him, silent and resolute, understood the importance of this moment. It was not simply about defending their homeland from an invading force. It was about preserving their identity, their legacy, and the ideals that had been passed down through centuries. Spartan discipline was unmatched. Every soldier knew his role in battle. Every move was calculated. Every breath was taken in unison. The phalanx, the core of Spartan warfare, was a testament to this. Shield to shield, spear to spear, the soldiers stood as one, a single entity with one purpose. They had been trained to fight as a cohesive unit, with no room for individual glory or pride. Each man's life was dedicated to the greater cause, and in battle, their unity would be their strength. Leonidas, knowing the odds were stacked against them, took solace in this unity. "We are not a mere army, but a brotherhood," he told his men, his gaze sweeping over their faces. "Each of us is a part of something greater, something eternal. Our courage will be immortalized, not in the tales of war, but in the hearts of those who will come after us. Remember this, my brothers. We fight for the honor of Sparta and for the freedom of all who follow." As the men listened, their hearts swelled with a quiet, burning resolve. The Spartan way of life, with its rigid discipline and unwavering loyalty, had prepared them for this very moment. They knew that defeat was not an option. The very idea of retreat was foreign to them. In their minds, to retreat was to dishonor their ancestors, to dishonor themselves. The Spartan warrior ethos, so deeply ingrained in their psyche, would carry them through the coming storm, no matter how fierce or overwhelming the enemy. They were not afraid of death, for death was merely the final act in a life devoted to honor. In the face of the Persian army, it was not the fear of dying that held them together, but the understanding that their sacrifice would ensure the survival of Sparta and the future of Greece. They would stand unwavering against the tide of the Persian onslaught. They would fight, not because they had to, but because it was their destiny. The first clash between the Greeks and the Persians at Thermopylae unfolded with a tension that rippled through the narrow pass. The Greeks, standing firm in their well-practiced phalanx formation, watched as the first wave of Persian soldiers advanced, their numbers seemingly endless. The ground trembled beneath the weight of the advancing army, a vast sea of men, horses, and war elephants. It was a sight that would have shaken the resolve of lesser men, but not the Spartans. The Greeks were prepared. The hoplite formation, a defensive wall of shields and spears, stood unyielding in the face of the Persian onslaught. The hoplites, heavy infantry protected by their bronze shields and armed with long spears, were a force forged through generations of training and discipline. In contrast, the Persian soldiers, though numerous and fierce, lacked the same cohesion and training. As the first Persian ranks charged into the narrow pass, they encountered a wall of spears, held steady with practiced precision. The Persians, unaccustomed to the discipline and power of the Greek formations, found themselves struggling to break through. Each time they attempted to flank or overwhelm the defenders, they were met with the impenetrable shield wall of the Greeks. The Persian warriors, many of them conscripts from across the vast Persian Empire, lacked the discipline of their Greek counterparts. The hoplites, driven by a code of honor and loyalty, stood their ground without hesitation, every movement calculated, every strike deliberate. The sheer effectiveness of the Greek defense was a shock to the Persians. They had expected to crush the Greeks under the weight of their overwhelming numbers. Yet, despite their vast superiority in men, the Persians found their momentum slowing, their advances thwarted by the skill and cohesion of the Greek defenders. The narrow terrain worked to the Greeks' advantage, limiting the effectiveness of the Persian cavalry and forcing the infantry into close-quarter combat, where the Greeks excelled. Xerxes, observing from the rear, was perplexed. His army, which had swept through countless lands, was now halted by a mere fraction of his force. The Persian archers, famed for their numbers and precision, loosed volley after volley of arrows, but the Greek shields absorbed the barrage with little effect. The Greeks pressed forward, their spears finding their marks, cutting down Persian soldiers with frightening efficiency. For the first time in the campaign, the Persian army was confronted by something it had not anticipated: resistance that did not break, a resistance that was built on the iron will of the warriors themselves. The shock of the Persian soldiers was palpable. They had been told of the invincibility of their numbers, of the inevitability of their victory, but here, in the narrow pass of Thermopylae, their superiority in numbers had little weight against the power of discipline, unity, and strategy. The first clash was not a decisive victory for the Greeks, but it was a powerful statement. The Persians had learned that their sheer numbers would not guarantee them success. The Greeks had given them a taste of what was to come, an unrelenting stand that would be written into the annals of history. Xerxes watched from his lofty perch as the battle unfolded beneath him. The sight of his once unassailable army faltering against the determined Greeks, sending a wave of disbelief through his mind. His vast, well-equipped force, stretching from horizon to horizon, was supposed to be unstoppable. Yet here, at Thermopylae, his soldiers struggled against a fraction of that number. The Greeks, specifically the Spartans, were holding firm in their unyielding phalanx, a tightly knit wall of shields and spears that repelled wave after wave of the Persian onslaught. Anger began to boil inside Xerxes, the frustration evident in his clenched fists and the hard lines of his face. He had expected quick, decisive victory, an easy conquest to bolster his empire and add another glorious chapter to his reign. Instead, he faced humiliation. His elite infantry, the Immortals, had been driven back by men he had assumed to be nothing more than primitive warriors clinging to outdated methods. It was an insult to his empire, an affront that threatened to undo everything he had worked for. In the face of this resistance, Xerxes' initial arrogance turned to fury. He had underestimated the resilience and training of the Greek warriors. These were not just men defending their land. They were seasoned fighters, molded by years of Spartan discipline and warfare. Their unity, their iron will to stand against any force, was something Xerxes had not foreseen when he first set his sights on Greece. Why do they not fall? Xerxes demanded, his voice thick with anger, as he turned to his commanders for answers. His generals, though experienced, were hesitant. The terrain had worked in the Greeks' favour, and no matter how many times his forces tried to press into the narrow pass, the Greeks were there, unyielding, relentless. Send in more troops, Xerxes commanded with a sharp edge to his tone. His pride had been wounded, and no setback would be tolerated. He was determined to break the Greek defences, to crush their will to resist, and prove the might of his empire, once and for all. The thought that a mere handful of Greeks could defy the Persian might was an affront to everything he stood for. His orders were swift and brutal. Xerxes called for the full force of his army to push harder against the Greek lines. He ordered his archers to release volley after volley of arrows, his cavalry to strike the flanks, and his infantry to force their way into the pass. He would not be denied. Despite the mounting pressure, the Greeks stood resolute. Xerxes' anger only deepened as hour after hour passed, and the Greeks did not break. Every time the Persian forces pushed forward, they were met with a renewed ferocity, a resilience that seemed to mock the overwhelming power of Xerxes' army. His frustration reached a boiling point. This battle, which he had assumed would be a mere formality, had become a test of endurance, one that threatened to unravel his perception of invincibility. As the day wore on, Xerxes' mind was consumed by a singular thought. He would break them, no matter the cost. As the battle at Thermopylae raged on, the sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the blood-soaked earth. The Persian forces, relentless in their attempts to breach the narrow pass, had struggled for hours against the unyielding Greek defense. Xerxes, his anger still simmering from the setbacks his army had faced, now called upon his most elite force, the Immortals. The Immortals, a feared division of the Persian army, had built a reputation for their unwavering discipline and fearsome presence. With their imposing armor, intricately decorated shields, and battle-hardened experience, they were the spearhead of Xerxes' empire. They had crushed foes across Asia, and Xerxes believed they would break the Greeks once and for all. The Persian king's confidence was bolstered by the belief that no force in the world could stand against the Immortals for long. As they marched into the fray, their arrival seemed to shift the very air around the battlefield. The Immortals moved with synchronized precision, their steps echoing like the drumbeats of war. Xerxes watched intently, certain that their entry would signal the final collapse of the Greek resistance. But as the Immortals clashed with the Greek defenders, a stunned silence fell over the Persian ranks. The elite force was met not with easy victory, but with a wall of Greek resolve, spearheaded by the Spartans who stood firm, their shields locked together in a steadfast phalanx. The Immortals had expected a swift breakthrough, but the Greeks, with their finely honed formations, fought with a ferocity that defied all logic. Every charge was met with unrelenting counterattacks, every swing of a Persian blade blocked by a shield or deflected by a spear. The shock was palpable. The Immortals, who had taken entire armies apart in other battles, now found themselves locked in a struggle they had not anticipated. The Greeks, seemingly tireless and unyielding, fought as one, each Spartan driven not only by the will to protect their homeland, but by a fierce sense of duty and honor that no Persian force could easily overcome. Leonidas, his mind as sharp as his spear, saw the Immortals enter the fray and instantly understood what they represented. He knew the challenge they posed, but he also saw an opportunity. As the Immortals pressed in on his men, Leonidas adjusted his strategy with swift, decisive action. He ordered his warriors to retreat slightly, drawing the Persians deeper into the pass, away from the more open ground where their cavalry could exploit the terrain. It was a trap, a brilliant maneuver that would give the Greeks the advantage. The Persian Immortals, relentless, but now far from the protection of their archers and cavalry, found themselves in an increasingly precarious position. The narrowness of the pass, once an advantage for the Persians, now worked against them. Leonidas had lured them into a kill zone. The Immortals, shocked by the resistance and unable to break through, began to falter. Their once imposing charge slowed as they realized they were fighting an enemy unlike any they had faced before. Leonidas's tactics were making their mark, each move calculated, each decision made with the confidence of a leader who knew his men, his terrain, and his enemy. Leonidas stood at the front lines, his gaze unwavering as the clash of metal and the cries of battle rang out around him. His presence was magnetic, drawing the eyes of his warriors as they fought with unmatched discipline and tenacity. It was not just his strength or his reputation that commanded respect. It was his ability to lead with a calm, unwavering focus, even in the heat of battle. Leonidas embodied the spirit of Sparta itself, stoic, resolute, and relentless in his duty. But his leadership was not confined to his own men. Leonidas understood the importance of collaboration among the Greek commanders, despite the deep-rooted rivalries that existed between the city-states. The alliance between Athens, Sparta, and the other Greek forces was fragile, held together by necessity more than trust. Yet, in the face of the overwhelming Persian threat, Leonidas worked tirelessly to forge a united front. He met with the other commanders in the quiet moments between skirmishes, offering counsel and direction, always striving to maintain a cohesive strategy. The Athenians, with their naval prowess, were focused on holding the seas, while the Peloponnesians, led by Sparta, remained steadfast in their commitment to defend the pass. It was a delicate balance, but Leonidas knew that only through cooperation could they hope to overcome the Persian juggernaut. Unlike the more diplomatic leaders of Athens and other Greek city-states, Leonidas was a man of action, driven by a fierce sense of duty that left no room for negotiation. Where Athens' leaders sought to secure alliances and avoid direct confrontation when possible, Sparta's leadership was built on a foundation of martial excellence. Every decision made by Leonidas was calculated to ensure the survival of Greece first and foremost through the strength of arms. Yet, despite his militaristic approach, he knew when to listen. The Athenians, under their leader Themistocles, had a unique understanding of naval warfare, which was crucial for the Greeks' overall strategy. Leonidas respected Themistocles' brilliance and worked closely with him, trusting in the Athenians' strategic vision. In contrast, the other Greek commanders, representing the smaller city-states, struggled to find their place within the larger framework of the Spartan-led defense. Some were more hesitant, seeking diplomatic solutions to the growing conflict, while others, driven by fear or self-interest, sought to pull their forces away from the front lines. Leonidas, however, was a beacon of resolve among them. His unwavering commitment to the cause of Greek unity inspired those around him, convincing even the more reluctant commanders to stand firm. In moments of doubt, when Persian forces seemed to surge endlessly forward, it was Leonidas's presence that steadied the Greek lines. He did not speak often, but when he did, his words carried the weight of Sparta's centuries-old warrior tradition. Every order he gave, every strategy he employed, reflected the singular purpose of defending Greece at all costs. And as the battle raged, the unity he had forged through leadership, determination, and an unyielding will to resist became the cornerstone of the Greek defense. As the sun hung high over the narrow pass at Thermopylae, the Persian army, despite its overwhelming numbers, found itself trapped by the very terrain that had seemed like an advantage just days before. Xerxes' vast army, with its endless lines of soldiers, war elephants, and cavalry, had begun to feel the weight of their own immensity. The pass, once seen as a mere obstacle to be swept aside, had now become the very force that was confounding their advances. The narrowness of the gorge, the jagged cliffs on either side, and the unforgiving terrain meant that the Persian cavalry, famed for its speed and power, was rendered useless. The horses could barely maneuver through the confined spaces, their hooves slipping on the uneven ground, and the riders struggling to maintain control. Their once feared flanking tactics were ineffective, as the Greeks, entrenched in their positions, denied them the opportunity to gain any advantage. Xerxes, who had expected an easy victory, could only watch as his forces struggled to break through the Greek defences. The Persian army had been trained for a battle of attrition, relying on sheer numbers to overwhelm their enemies. Yet here, in this small pass, that tactic had no place. Every time the Persians attempted to advance, they were met with the unyielding wall of the Greek hoplite phalanx. The Greeks stood firm, their shields locked together, spears bristling like the spines of some mythical creature, their disciplined formations holding strong against wave after wave of attackers. The Persian infantry, although numerous, was not equipped for the kind of grinding, close-quarters battle that the phalanx required. The Greeks, with their tightly knit formations, were able to repel every Persian charge with methodical precision. For every Persian soldier that broke through, 2 or 3 more fell to the sharp tips of Greek spears, driven forward by the disciplined rhythm of their formations. The Greeks, honed by years of training and a way of life built around warfare, understood that this was not a battle of strength alone, but one of endurance and will. They had been prepared for this moment since birth. Xerxes, standing in his command tent, could not fathom how his army so mighty and vast could struggle against a mere handful of warriors. His frustration mounted as he realized that the battle was not simply a matter of numbers. The Greek soldiers had something that his Persian army lacked, a sense of unity, a shared purpose. The Greeks, despite their differences, stood together in the face of the world's mightiest force. Each wave of Persian soldiers that was repelled only strengthened the resolve of the Greeks. Leonidas, with his unwavering leadership, had crafted a defense that was as much a mental battle as a physical one. As the hours dragged on, the Persian forces, once so sure of their victory, began to feel the weight of their own exhaustion. The terrain, the unyielding Greek defense, and the inescapable truth that they were not fighting a battle of numbers, but of spirit, were slowly wearing them down. The clash of bronze and steel echoed through the narrow gorge of Thermopylae as the battle raged on. The air was thick with the smell of sweat, blood, and dust, and the ground trembled beneath the weight of men locked in fierce combat. The Persians, relentless in their onslaught, pushed forward in wave after wave, but each time they met the unyielding wall of Spartan warriors. The narrow pass, which had once seemed like an insignificant stretch of land, had now become the crucible in which both armies were forged. The Spartans fought with a fervour born of necessity. There was no retreat, no escape. They stood firm, shoulder to shoulder, their shields locked in unison, while their spears thrust forward with practiced precision, cutting through Persian flesh. The narrowness of the pass gave the Greeks a significant advantage. It was a battleground that favoured the disciplined, the unyielding, and the courageous. The Persians, with their numbers, found themselves funneled into the choke point, unable to fully utilise their strength. The massive Persian war elephants, which had once struck fear into the hearts of armies, struggled in the confined space, their riders powerless against the well-coordinated Greek defence. The Persian cavalry, which had been expected to sweep across the field, was rendered ineffective in the tight corridors of the pass. Their horses, struggling to manoeuvre, collided with their own men, unable to break the Spartan lines. For the Greeks, however, the battle was not just one of strategy, it was a test of resolve, of honour, and of courage. Each Spartan soldier fought not only for his life, but for the survival of his city, his family, and his people. There was no fear in their hearts, only an unshakable determination to stand firm. The rhythm of the battle was like a violent dance, each Spartan, a part of a greater whole, moving with deadly grace as they fought side by side, each blow a testament to their discipline and strength. The sounds of clashing weapons were accompanied by the cries of warriors as they fell, but it was the unwavering will of the Greeks that turned the tide. Leonidas, at the heart of the fray, moved with the precision of a commander who had long since mastered the art of war. His presence, a beacon of strength, inspired his men to push back the ever-pressing waves of Persians. His sword was a blur as it cleaved through the enemy lines, each strike an embodiment of the Spartan ideal, unyielding and unrelenting. His voice, steady and commanding, called out to his warriors, urging them to hold fast, to endure. The battlefield, soaked in blood, became a symbol of heroism. The Greeks, though vastly outnumbered, fought with a strength that was not born of mere physical prowess, but of a spirit forged over centuries of war. In the face of overwhelming odds, they stood resolute. Each man, whether a seasoned veteran or a young warrior, knew that this battle, though brutal, was one that would be remembered for eternity. And as the hours passed, the bond between them grew stronger, a bond that could not be broken, an unspoken understanding that they would fight and die together for something far greater than themselves. As the battle raged on, the Greeks' grip on the pass seemed unbreakable, but beneath the surface, an insidious threat was beginning to take shape. In the shadowed recesses of the Persian camp, Ephialtes, a Greek man born from a distant region, stood torn between loyalty and desperation. His name had once been a whisper of shame, a shadow of betrayal. Yet, in the heat of the moment, his actions would make him infamous. In exchange for promises of wealth and recognition, he offered Xerxes a secret that had the potential to turn the tide of the battle, a hidden mountain path that bypassed the Greek defences. The path, narrow and treacherous, was unknown to most. It wound through rugged terrain, far from the watchful eyes of the Spartan warriors, leading directly to the rear of the Greek lines. If the Persians could gain control of this route, they would have the opportunity to surround Leonidas's army from behind, cutting off any chance of retreat. The Greeks, already outnumbered, would be trapped between the massive Persian army in front and a fresh wave of attackers emerging from the rear. Ephialtes had given them the key to the fortress, and with it, the chance to obliterate the last line of Greek resistance. Xerxes, eager to break the will of the Greeks, was quick to seize upon this betrayal. His heart swelled with renewed confidence as he saw his victory within reach. He dispatched a group of soldiers to seize the mountain path and surround the Greek force. But Ephialtes' actions, though treacherous, would not go unnoticed for long. Back at the Greek camp, a sense of unease began to settle among the commanders. Leonidas, ever vigilant, had a sixth sense for the shifting tides of battle. His sharp eyes had caught glimpses of movement on the ridges, a sign of something out of place. Then, word came to him rumours of a betrayal, a whisper of a hidden path leading to their flank. It was a threat too dangerous to ignore. Leonidas summoned his most trusted officers, his heart heavy with the weight of the news. His mind raced, trying to process the implications of the new information. They had been fighting with everything they had, but now, it seemed, their time was running out. Leonidas made a swift decision. He ordered his forces to stand firm, to hold the line with all their might, but the reality of their situation was clear. The betrayal threatened to break the very heart of their defence. Yet, despite the overwhelming odds, Leonidas knew that there was no choice but to fight on. He would not let Ephialtes' treachery define their fate. The Spartans would meet the coming danger head-on, no matter the cost. They would stand and fight, not just for their city, but for the freedom of all Greece. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, the shadow of treason loomed larger over the battlefield. But the warriors of Sparta, undeterred by the impending doom, tightened their ranks, their resolve unshaken. They had come this far, and they would not falter now. The storm was coming, but they would face it with the same bravery that had carried them to this moment. The air grew thick with tension as the first signs of impending doom appeared over the Greek lines. From his vantage point, Leonidas could see the stirrings of the Persian army on the ridgelines above, the faint glimmer of sunlight on their weapons, reflecting the growing threat that loomed over them. His heart pounded in his chest, but his expression remained unchanged, his stoic gaze fixed upon the horizon. It was not fear that gripped him, but the realization that his warriors, though resolute and steadfast, were about to be trapped in the very heart of their defence. The Persian forces, bolstered by the betrayal of Ephialtes, had successfully manoeuvred through the mountain pass, encircling the Greek position from behind. The narrow pass that had given the Greeks their advantage now threatened to become their coffin. The feeling of being surrounded was unmistakable, the once invincible line of Spartan warriors beginning to buckle under the overwhelming might of the enemy. Despite the courage that burned in their hearts, the harsh truth was clear. Encirclement was imminent. Leonidas's mind raced as he considered their options. His warriors had fought valiantly, holding their ground against impossible odds. Yet, now, with the Persian army flanking them, the situation had become dire. The sound of Persian war cries echoed through the narrow valley, a reminder that the end was drawing near. Leonidas knew the fate of his men, his brothers in arms was sealed, but the decision was still his. He could order a retreat, but there was no escape. The Persians would follow, and the Greek army would be shattered. It was a death sentence, just one in a long line of sacrifices that had come to define their cause. The Spartan king stood tall, his back straight and unmoving, even as the world around him began to collapse. He turned to his warriors, their faces smeared with blood and dust, their expressions hardened by the brutal reality of the battle. With a voice low but resolute, he spoke, his words carrying the weight of a man who had already accepted his fate. He would not retreat. He would not surrender. "We stand here as free men," Leonidas said, his voice cutting through the rising wind, "and we shall fall as free men. We will not let this day be the one that breaks us. No matter the number of enemies that surround us, we will stand firm." The silence that followed was filled with the unspoken resolve of the men who had sworn their lives to this very moment. There would be no retreat, no surrender. Their line, though broken in places and thinning, would hold. They would fight to the death, not just for their own survival, but for the freedom of their people, for the legacy of Sparta that would echo through the annals of history. The Spartan warriors, with their shields raised high and spears poised, would make their final stand. It was not just the end of a battle, but the end of a chapter 1 that would be remembered for generations to come. The battle had reached its final moments. The once proud line of Greek warriors, now bloodied and battered, stood firm against the encroaching tide of Persian forces. The sun was sinking lower in the sky, casting long shadows over the valley as the last remnants of daylight clung desperately to the scene of carnage. All around them, the sound of battle rang in their ears, the clash of steel, the screams of the dying, the heavy footfalls of the enemy advancing with relentless force. Leonidas stood at the front of his men, his shield battered, his sword stained, but his spirit unbroken. Despite the weight of the odds pressing upon them, there was no surrender in his heart. His warriors, standing shoulder to shoulder with him, had fought with the ferocity of lions. They had held the pass for days, defying the might of an empire. But now, with the Persian army surrounding them, their position was untenable. The narrow pass that had served them so well was now their tomb, and every breath they took could be their last. Yet, in that moment, Leonidas felt no fear, only an overwhelming sense of duty. He had led his men to this place, and it was here that they would make their final stand. He turned to face the men around him, their faces grim, their bodies weary from the unrelenting slaughter. His voice, though strained, rang out with the authority of a king who had never known retreat. "Brothers," he called, his voice cutting through the chaos, "today we fight, not for ourselves, but for all of Greece. We stand here in the face of death, not as men who fear it, but as men who embrace it with honor. This is the moment that will define us. This is our legacy, our final gift to the world. We will die here, yes, but we will die as free men, warriors who stood against the darkness and held the light high." The silence that followed his words was filled with a deep, unspoken understanding. They knew what lay ahead. There would be no escape, no reinforcements, no miracle. There was only the fight, the final, desperate charge against an enemy that vastly outnumbered them. But Leonidas had given them something more than hope. He had given them a reason to fight, to face the oncoming wave of destruction with the courage of 1,000 men. With a rallying cry that echoed through the pass, the Spartan king raised his spear high. "For Sparta! For Greece!" he shouted, his voice cutting through the noise of the battlefield like a blade. The remaining warriors, fueled by a shared purpose, surged forward with everything they had left. The Persian forces, though vast and mighty, were unprepared for the ferocity of the charge. The Greeks fought as though the gods themselves were watching, every strike delivered with precision, every breath a final act of defiance. But, despite their courage, the end was inevitable. One by one, the warriors fell, their bodies joining the countless others that had already stained the earth with their blood. Leonidas fought on, his every movement a testament to the Spartan way of life. He knew that his death, though certain, would mark the beginning of a legend that would inspire generations to come. As the last of his strength drained away, Leonidas fell, but even in death, his spirit lingered, a symbol of unyielding resistance and the indomitable will of the Spartan warriors who had given everything for their people. The final moments of Leonidas and his 300 Spartans were etched in the hearts of all who witnessed them, an image of unwavering courage in the face of certain death. As the Persian forces closed in, their numbers overwhelming, the small group of Spartan warriors fought with the intensity of men who knew their time had come but refused to yield. Leonidas, bloodied and worn, stood as the embodiment of the Spartan spirit, unbroken, unbowed, and resolute. His warriors, though exhausted, rallied around him, each man making his last stand with the same ferocity that had marked their entire lives. The battle had been brutal, the heat of the fighting unbearable, yet the Spartans fought on, their shields held high, their spears thrusting into the advancing Persian ranks with deadly precision. They were warriors, and though they knew the end was near, they faced it with the honor that had been drilled into them since birth. Their shield wall, once an unyielding fortress, was now a crumbling defense, but their resolve was as solid as ever. Leonidas, his body battered and broken, never faltered. He fought not just for himself, but for his men, for Sparta, and for the future of Greece. He knew that this battle, though it would cost him his life, would inspire generations to come. His leadership had been unwavering, his words, a call to arms that would echo through the ages. As the final wave of Persian soldiers surged forward, Leonidas fell, struck down by a Persian spear. His death was not the end of his legend, but the spark that would ignite the fires of resistance across Greece. The loss of Leonidas and his 300 Spartans was a blow that reverberated through the Greek ranks. The heroic last stand of these warriors, men who had chosen death over submission, was a moment that would forever alter the course of history. For the Greeks, the sacrifice of the Spartans became a symbol of defiance, a testament to the power of unity and resolve in the face of impossible odds. The other Greek forces, though they had fought valiantly, now felt the weight of their loss. The Spartans had given everything, and their sacrifice would not be forgotten. The heroism of Leonidas and his men became a rallying cry, a reminder that even in death, they had achieved something greater than victory on the battlefield. They had inspired a nation. As the Persian forces began to overrun the last defences of Thermopylae, the Greeks, though mourning the loss of their greatest warriors, knew that the fire of resistance still burned. Leonidas's death was not the end of their struggle, but the beginning of a new chapter, one in which the Spartans would be remembered not for how they died, but for how they lived, and for the sacrifice they made to ensure the survival of Greece. Xerxes stood at the edge of the battlefield, his eyes fixed on the bodies of the fallen Greeks, the remnants of the 300 Spartans who had held their ground until the very end. Victory was his, but the cost weighed heavy on his heart. He had broken their lines, crushed their resistance, and claimed Thermopylae, but the price of this victory was not one of triumph. It was one of awe and lingering disbelief. As the Persian king surveyed the battlefield, the weight of what had just transpired settled in. He had watched as his forces, at first certain of their overwhelming superiority, had struggled to break the Spartan defense. The sight of the 300 men, though vastly outnumbered, standing firm against the massive Persian army, had left an indelible mark on him. It was not the bloodshed, nor the bodies, but the unyielding spirit of those few men that gripped him. They had known they would die, yet they had fought with the courage of lions, their swords raised in defiance until the very end. Even in victory, Xerxes could not shake the respect he felt for them. His mind, usually sharp and calculating, was clouded by the emotions that swept through him. He had conquered, but there was something unspeakably honourable in the way the Spartans had met their end. He had expected to feel a sense of vindication, to savour the victory over those who dared to challenge him. Instead, he felt a strange emptiness, a respect for an enemy he had annihilated. The Spartans had fought as though they had nothing to lose, as though the honour of their people was worth more than life itself. Xerxes, a king who had known luxury and power all his life, had seen nothing like it. The Persian army, too, felt the aftershock of the battle. The warriors, who had surged forward with confidence, now trudged through the remnants of the fight with a quieter step. Victory was theirs, yet their morale had been shaken. They had faced an enemy that had fought not for survival, but for honour, and that, Xerxes realised, was something they had not been prepared for. His soldiers had grown accustomed to overwhelming forces, to easily vanquishing enemies that had no will to fight. But the Spartans had been different. They had shown a level of discipline and determination that even the Persian king had not anticipated. As Xerxes turned away from the battlefield, the reality of what had occurred began to sink in. He had won the battle, but the true cost of that victory had left a scar on his soul. The sacrifice of the 300 Spartans had changed something in him. He had triumphed, but it was a hollow victory, one that left him questioning the very nature of war, of sacrifice, and of what it meant to truly conquer. The aftermath of Thermopylae left the Greek world in turmoil. The once unyielding defiance of the 300 Spartans was no more than a memory, their bodies scattered across the battlefield, reminders of a sacrifice that had come too late. The narrow pass, which had stood as a symbol of hope, now lay open, and the Persian army began its advance deeper into Greece. The Greeks, broken but not beaten, retreated, their hearts heavy with the knowledge that they had lost one of the most valiant battles in their history. In the wake of defeat, Greek morale had plummeted. The death of Leonidas and his men was a devastating blow, not only to Sparta but to all of Greece. The Spartans had held their ground with such honour that their sacrifice became a rallying cry for the rest of the Greek states. The news of their final stand spread quickly, carried on the wind and through the mouths of those who had witnessed the brutality of the battle. It was a tragedy, yes, but in that tragedy was born something stronger resolve. As the Greek forces withdrew to their cities, many questioned the cost of continuing the fight. The Persian threat loomed larger with each passing day, and some, particularly in the more delicate city-states, wondered if the war could be won. But the sacrifice of the 300 was not forgotten. It began to stir something deep within the hearts of the Greeks. Their death had not been in vain. The nobility of their fight, the sheer heroism of their resolve, transcended the defeat. It was as if the very essence of their bravery had been etched into the spirit of every man and woman who heard their story. Across the Greek world, from the bustling markets of Athens to the quiet homes of the rural countryside, the conversation began to shift. The Greeks would not simply cower before the Persian threat. They would fight against all odds, against all logic, and they would fight for the memory of the 300, whose sacrifice had rekindled the flame of resistance. The Spartans, it seemed, had planted the seeds of a new plan, one that would unite the fractured city-states and forge an alliance that had seemed impossible before. Athens, led by its commanders, began preparing for the inevitable onslaught. The Athenian navy, strengthened by the sense of purpose born from the sacrifice at Thermopylae, began to mobilize. New alliances were formed in the shadows, and secret meetings took place behind closed doors. The Greeks were preparing to make their stand, not just to defend their land, but to honor the men who had shown them the way. In that moment, the Greeks realized that their true battle was not just against the Persian Empire, but for their very identity, for the honor of those who had already given everything, and though they had lost Thermopylae, they had not lost their will to fight. The war was far from over, and in the depths of their despair, the flame of resistance had never burned brighter. In the weeks following the loss at Thermopylae, the flames of vengeance began to burn brightly within the hearts of the Greeks. The death of Leonidas and his 300 Spartans had struck a blow not only to their pride, but to their very sense of identity. Yet, from this wound, something greater began to emerge, an unshakable desire for revenge. The Greeks could not forget the sacrifice that had been made in the narrow pass. The image of those warriors standing firm against overwhelming odds became a symbol of defiance, one that ignited a fire within every corner of the Greek world. In Athens, the leadership understood that their people could no longer afford to wallow in despair. A decisive shift began to take place, turning the Greek focus from the pain of defeat to the pursuit of retribution. The fall of Thermopylae had made one thing painfully clear. The Persian Empire, with its vast resources and unrelenting might, would not stop until it had consumed Greece. The very existence of the Greek states now hung by a thread. Xerxes had not only invaded their lands, but had trampled upon their dignity, and that was something the Greeks could not allow to stand. Behind the walls of the Athenian Acropolis and in the halls of Spartan leadership, the discussions began in earnest. There was no longer room for division, no time for internal squabbles. The Greek city-states, once fractured by their rivalries, now saw the need to unite under a single purpose. Their very survival was at stake, and their shared hatred for the Persian invaders became the bond that would tie them together. The call for a unified front was met with resistance in some quarters, but the memory of the 300 and their steadfast resolve soon drowned out any doubts. The Greek cities, from the proud warriors of Sparta to the intellectuals of Athens, began preparing for a confrontation that would determine their fate. Naval forces were swiftly rebuilt, reinforced by every available ship, while military leaders worked tirelessly to ensure that the land forces would be ready for the next great battle. Each city-state, with its individual strengths and weaknesses, played a part in the forming of this reluctant alliance. What had seemed impossible, unifying the fiercely independent Greek states, was now their only hope. The call for vengeance echoed in every assembly hall and every marketplace, and though distrust still lingered between the city-states, they understood that their fight was no longer one for individual glory. It was a fight for the future of their people. Xerxes, in his arrogance, believed that the Greek forces would splinter in the wake of their defeat, but he had underestimated their resilience. Each day that passed brought the Greeks closer together, fueled by the singular thought of avenging the fall of Thermopylae. They had lost the battle, but they would not lose the war. The Greeks began to prepare not just for a defense, but for a full-scale retaliation against Xerxes and his empire. The seeds of revenge had been sown, and in the coming months, they would take root in the hearts of every Greek soldier who stood ready to strike back against the Persian threat. The Battle of Salamis began under the weight of mounting tension, with the fate of Greece hanging precariously in the balance. After the fall of Thermopylae, the Persian forces moved with frightening efficiency, capturing city after city. Yet, despite the overwhelming odds, the Greeks still had one advantage left: their navy. The shores of Salamis, a narrow strip of water between the island and the Athenian coast, became the setting for a struggle that would define the future of Greek resistance. Xerxes, confident in his vast numbers, had positioned his naval forces in a broad arc, expecting an easy sweep of the Greeks. The Persian fleet, massive and powerful, seemed invincible on open water, but the Greeks, led by Themistocles of Athens, had other plans. Recognizing that the narrow straits would limit the maneuverability of the Persian ships, they set a trap that would force Xerxes into a battle on the Greeks' terms. It was a gamble, one that required impeccable timing and perfect coordination. The Greek fleet, although smaller, was quicker, better trained, and more familiar with the local waters. Themistocles understood that the key to victory lay in drawing the Persians into the confined spaces of Salamis, where their numbers would be more of a disadvantage than an advantage. The Greeks lured the Persians into these tight waters, and when the Persians moved in for the kill, the Greek fleet struck with ferocity. The smaller Greek ships darted in and out, using their superior speed to ram the Persian vessels, inflicting significant damage before retreating into the shadows of the strait. The battle raged with brutal intensity as the Greeks fought with unmatched determination, their fury fueled by the memory of fallen comrades and the belief that this was their last chance to stand against the Persian tide. The Persians, though skilled in naval warfare, were unprepared for the strategic brilliance of the Greeks. As the Persians attempted to maneuver their enormous ships, they found themselves trapped in the narrow channels, unable to break free from the Greek assault. Themistocles' strategy worked with devastating precision. The Greeks, once again, turned the tide in their favor. Xerxes, watching from his vantage point on land, saw his fleet crumble beneath the calculated brilliance of the Greeks. His hopes of swiftly conquering Greece now seemed futile. The Persians were forced into retreat, their ships shattered and scattered, their pride deeply wounded. The victory at Salamis was not just a tactical triumph, it was the turning point in the Greek resistance. The defeat struck a psychological blow to the Persian Empire. Xerxes, unable to understand how such a small force could have outsmarted his vast navy, was left with the bitter realization that the Greeks were not as easily defeated as he had once thought. Salamis became the rallying cry for all of Greece. It proved that with unity, strategy, and courage, they could stand against the greatest empire the world had ever known. The victory in the narrow waters of Salamis sparked the hope of eventual victory and made it clear the Greeks would fight, and they would win on their terms. The defeat at Salamis was a turning point that would reverberate throughout the Persian Empire. The once formidable fleet of Xerxes lay in tatters, scattered and broken in the aftermath of the battle. What had seemed like an inevitable march toward conquest now appeared to be nothing more than a fleeting dream. The Persian king, once so confident in his overwhelming superiority, now found himself with a fractured empire and a fleet that had been utterly humiliated by a smaller, more agile enemy. Xerxes, unable to absorb the blow dealt by the Greeks, decided to withdraw. His confidence shattered, he retreated to the safety of his homeland, leaving behind his army, which, without their naval support, was now vulnerable and unsure. The defeat at Salamis had stripped the Persian forces of their ability to control the seas, isolating their vast army in Greece. The Greeks, bolstered by their newfound sense of unity and pride, now saw a chance to strike back at the heart of the Persian invasion. Xerxes' return to Persia marked the beginning of the disintegration of the might of his empire. The retreat was a humiliation, and the loss at Salamis did more than cripple his navy. It threatened to unravel the foundations of his vast empire. News of the defeat spread quickly across the Persian world, shaking the confidence of those who had once believed in the invincibility of Xerxes' rule. The once feared king now found himself unable to protect his own empire from the swelling tide of resistance in Greece. The strength that Persia had shown during its initial advances began to falter, and its enemies sensed the shift in momentum. Meanwhile, the victories at Salamis, both naval and psychological, were monumental for the Greek city-states. The Greeks had demonstrated that they could stand up to the Persian juggernaut, and more importantly, they had learned to unify their forces for a common cause. The Spartans, with their unyielding discipline, and the Athenians, with their naval mastery, had together dealt a blow to the heart of the Persian war machine. The defeat at Salamis inspired not only the Greek city-states, but also the people who had long been under Persian rule. The defeat shifted the balance of power in the Aegean. The Greeks, once divided, now found a newfound sense of unity and purpose. In the wake of the battle, the Greek states began to push back against Persian influence, solidifying the formation of alliances and coalitions that would eventually take the fight directly to Persia. The loss at Salamis shattered the aura of invincibility that had surrounded the Persian Empire, showing that with unity and strategy, even the greatest empire in the world could be defeated. For Greece, the victories at Salamis, both strategic and moral, were the seeds of a new future. The men who had fought and died in those narrow waters had sparked a revolution of spirit. Xerxes' retreat was not just the withdrawal of an army, it marked the beginning of the end for the Persian Empire's ambitions in Greece. The tide had turned, and the Persian threat, once so overwhelming, was now in retreat. The legacy of the 300 Spartans, and the men who stood with them, would echo through the corridors of history for centuries to come. The sacrifice at Thermopylae, where they fought against impossible odds, became a symbol of unwavering courage, loyalty, and honor. The Spartan warriors, led by King Leonidas, had chosen to face certain death, not for personal glory but for the preservation of their people and the ideals they held dear. They understood that their deaths, though tragic, would not be in vain. They hoped, instead, that their resistance would serve as a spark for a wider revolt, a beacon for those who would continue the fight against tyranny. Their actions galvanized the Greek city-states, and though Thermopylae was a loss on the battlefield, it was a triumph of spirit. The bravery of those men inspired the Greeks to fight with renewed vigor and resolve. The tale of their stand at the pass spread like wildfire across the Greek world, fueling a sense of unity among states that had long been divided by their rivalries. Even the most skeptical of the Greeks began to understand that their only chance of survival lay in standing together against the might of Persia. The 300 Spartans had proven that a few could stand against the many, and their willingness to sacrifice for the common good set a powerful example for future generations. The Spartan sacrifice, though heavy with loss, became the birth of a new sense of Greek unity. Before Thermopylae, Greece had been a fragmented collection of city-states, each focused primarily on its own interests. But in the aftermath of the battle, the common threat of Persian conquest brought them together. The memory of the 300's bravery served as a reminder that, no matter their differences, their survival depended on their ability to unite and resist. Athens, Sparta, and even the smaller city-states understood that they were stronger together. The idea of collective strength, born from the sacrifice at Thermopylae, would fuel their next victories, first at Salamis and then at Plataea. The legacy of the Spartans transcended the battlefield. It was woven into the very fabric of Greek culture, and their example of selfless duty became a touchstone for future leaders. Their courage was taught in schools, their story immortalized in song and theatre. The valor and honor they displayed at Thermopylae became a timeless ideal for the Greeks, and their sacrifice was seen as the catalyst that ultimately led to the Persian defeat. For centuries, their stand would remind all who heard it of the cost of freedom, the price of unity, and the power of unwavering resolve. Thermopylae became more than just a battle, it became a symbol of what could be achieved through sacrifice, and it would continue to inspire not only the Greeks, but generations of warriors and leaders long after. In the years following the defeat of the Persian Empire, Greece slowly began to recover from the ravages of war. The once fractured city-states, whose rivalries had seemed insurmountable, now stood united in a way they had never been before. The shadow of Persian aggression had united them in a common cause. and from this unity, a renewed sense of pride and strength emerged. It was as though the Greek spirit, tested by war and hardened by loss, was reborn in the aftermath of victory. Athens, in particular, emerged as the shining star of this new Greece. The city, once an underdog in the struggle against Persia, now found itself in a position of unprecedented power. The naval victory at Salamis had paved the way for Athens to take the lead in the Greek world, and the city's wealth and influence began to grow rapidly. With the creation of the Delian League, an alliance of Greek city-states, Athens took on the role of protector and leader, drawing on its powerful navy to defend Greece against any future threat. As Athens flourished, so did its cultural and intellectual pursuits. The arts, philosophy, and democracy flourished in the golden age of Athenian rule, and the city became the center of learning and thought for the entire Mediterranean world. Yet, despite Athens' rise, Sparta's influence in military matters remained formidable. The Spartan warriors, ever the embodiment of discipline and strength, continued to dominate the field of battle. While Athens may have ruled the seas, Sparta remained the unquestioned master of land warfare. Their warrior society, built on the principles of training, honor, and sacrifice, did not diminish in the wake of the Persian defeat. Instead, Sparta's leadership in military affairs continued to shape the future of Greece. Though the city-state itself had borne heavy losses at Thermopylae, its military traditions and culture remained intact, contributing to Greece's ability to defend itself from external threats. The rebirth of Greek glory was not without its complexities. Athens and Sparta, though united in their victory over Persia, soon found themselves at odds. The rise of Athenian power threatened the delicate balance that had existed between the city-states. Athens' growing empire and its naval dominance made some of the other city-states uneasy, and Sparta, with its military prowess, remained vigilant. The seeds of rivalry, which had long been a part of Greek history, began to sprout once more. Yet, in the years after the Persian Wars, there was still a sense of pride that filled the Greek heart. Pride, not just in their victory, but in the fact that they had emerged from the darkness stronger, more unified, and more capable than ever before. The legacy of the Persian Wars, of the stand at Thermopylae, of the triumph at Salamis, and of the Spartan and Athenian sacrifices lived on, woven into the fabric of Greek identity. And as the city-states rebuilt and grew in power, they carried the memory of their hard-won glory into the future, ready to face whatever challenges might lie ahead. In the years following the events at Thermopylae, the Greek philosophers, ever the seekers of truth and understanding, turned their attention to the profound implications of the battle. Their minds, sharpened by the weight of the conflict, wrestled with the ideas of sacrifice, duty, and honor, the very ideals that had driven the 300 Spartans to their heroic end. They found themselves grappling with the question of what it meant to die for one's people, to embrace death not as an end, but as a form of ultimate loyalty to a cause greater than oneself. Socrates, with his relentless questioning of human behavior and morality, would have surely found in Thermopylae a fertile ground for discourse. He might have asked whether the sacrifice of the Spartans was truly a noble one, or whether their actions were driven by a blind adherence to tradition and duty. Was their heroism born out of true virtue, or were they merely products of a society that placed duty above all else? In his mind, such a sacrifice would likely raise the question of whether any individual should be asked to lay down their life for the state, or if there should be a deeper, more personal reckoning with the meaning of life and death. Plato, too, would have considered the implications of such a sacrifice in the context of his ideal state. In his view, the concept of the philosopher king, the ruler who governed not by power but by wisdom, would likely see the sacrifice of the 300 not as an isolated event, but as part of the larger moral fabric that held the state together. To him, the Spartans' devotion to the state could be seen as the embodiment of the philosopher's duty to the greater good. Yet, Plato might also have questioned whether such blind allegiance to the state could ever truly lead to wisdom, or whether it was merely a reflection of a corrupted understanding of what it meant to be truly virtuous. Aristotle, with his emphasis on ethics and the pursuit of the good life, would have viewed the actions at Thermopylae through the lens of virtue. The Spartans' courage and commitment to their people were, no doubt, qualities he would have admired, yet he would have also questioned whether the extreme nature of their sacrifice was a reflection of an imbalanced life. For Aristotle, true virtue lay in the golden mean, the balance between excess and deficiency. Did the Spartans' commitment to death not go beyond the balanced measure of courage into a form of extremism that hindered their pursuit of the good life? Yet, beyond the realm of the philosophers, the moral and spiritual lessons from the stand at Thermopylae were clear. The Greeks, from all corners of their society, recognized the immense courage displayed by the 300. Their sacrifice, not just in the battle itself, but in the willingness to lay down their lives for the future of their civilization, would go on to define the very essence of Greek identity. In the face of overwhelming odds, they had shown that honor, duty, and sacrifice were not mere words, but ideals that could shape the very course of history. The philosophers, in their reflections, might not have answered all the questions raised by such a profound act, but they would have agreed on one truth. The stand at Thermopylae was not just a military victory or a loss, it was a lesson in the depths of the human spirit. In the years that followed the Persian Wars, the Spartan way of life remained steadfast, deeply ingrained in the very fabric of Greek society. While Athens rose to prominence as the cultural and intellectual capital of the Greek world, Sparta held firm to its martial traditions, its reputation for discipline and military prowess remaining unmatched. The defeat at Thermopylae, despite the sacrifice of its greatest warriors, had not broken the Spartan spirit. In fact, it had solidified Sparta's place in history as the epitome of military excellence, where honor and duty to the state were not just ideals but a way of life. Sparta's warriors continued their rigorous training, refining their combat techniques and honing their bodies to the peak of physical perfection. Every Spartan male was raised with the expectation that he would serve as a soldier, his education and lifestyle oriented around the preparation for battle. From the agoge, the state-sponsored education system that turned boys into men, to the final test of maturity in combat, Spartan life was structured to ensure that no matter the conflict, they would be ready. Even in the peaceful years following the Persian Wars, training never ceased. It was not merely a matter of maintaining strength, but of preserving the very core of what it meant to be Spartan: resilience, obedience, and unwavering courage. The influence of Spartan traditions extended beyond its borders as well. Neighboring city-states, and even those further afield, looked to Sparta as the gold standard for military discipline. Their soldiers studied Spartan tactics, seeking to emulate the discipline and unity that made the Spartans feared on the battlefield. Stories of the 300 and their final stand at Thermopylae were retold for generations, not just as a symbol of valor, but as a lesson in the power of collective strength and individual resolve. The Spartan warrior, as an ideal, became a symbol of fortitude, unyielding in the face of overwhelming odds and resolute in the pursuit of duty. Yet, Sparta's influence was not confined solely to its warriors. The Spartan ethos of austerity and simplicity began to permeate Greek and even broader Hellenistic culture. The Spartan reverence for the state, the emphasis on discipline over luxury, and the unrelenting pursuit of physical and moral strength became ideals that many admired and aspired to emulate. Even the philosophers, who had often critiqued the rigid structure of Spartan society, found themselves drawn to the clarity of purpose that the Spartans embodied. In their pursuit of excellence, the Spartans had distilled the essence of martial virtue into something pure, something that could not easily be dismissed by those who sought to understand the nature of human strength. As generations passed, the legacy of Sparta and the ideals of the 300 endured. While Sparta itself may have waned as a dominant political power, its reputation as the epitome of martial discipline remained a beacon of honor. In every sword drawn and in every soldier that trained, the Spartan way lived on an unyielding testament to a way of life that prized duty over self, strength over weakness, and sacrifice over survival. Xerxes' retreat from Greece was a humbling one, his once proud and formidable Persian army reduced to a shadow of its former self. After the crushing defeat at Salamis and the failure to overrun Thermopylae, the Persian king's dreams of conquest were shattered. The vast empire he ruled, stretching from India to Egypt, now faced a bitter reality. The Greek city-states had proven resilient, their unity forged in the fire of resistance. The aftermath of the Greek victories sent ripples throughout Persia, shaking the foundation of the once unstoppable military machine. As Xerxes withdrew with his remaining forces, the psychological toll on his army was apparent. Many soldiers had witnessed the prowess and bravery of the Greek warriors, particularly the Spartans at Thermopylae, and they began to question their own strength. The Persian navy, so dominant at the outset of the campaign, had been decisively beaten at Salamis, a blow that struck at the heart of Xerxes' military strategy. Persian soldiers, once confident in their overwhelming numbers, now found themselves on the defensive, retreating through hostile terrain with Greek forces in pursuit. It was a retreat marked by shame and failure, not only in terms of military defeat, but also in the loss of prestige that had once been the cornerstone of the Persian Empire's power. The retreat also had lasting consequences for the Persian Empire. The political implications were profound. Xerxes, once hailed as a god-king, now returned to Persia with a tarnished reputation. His authority, though still absolute, was questioned by many in the empire, particularly by the nobility and military elite who had seen the immense cost of his failed campaign. The internal divisions within the empire grew, as the idea of Persian invincibility was eroded by the fact that a relatively small coalition of Greek city-states had managed to turn back their vast forces. The defeat at Salamis, in particular, revealed the limits of Persian power, and the empire's ambitions for expansion in the west began to falter. As Xerxes returned to Persia, the defeat would become a turning point, not just for Greece, but for the Persian Empire as well. The desire to expand further into Greece was now tempered by the harsh reality that the Greeks, united in their defiance, could not be so easily subdued. The failure at Salamis and Thermopylae altered the course of Persian history, shifting the empire's focus inward as it struggled to consolidate its vast holdings. Xerxes, once so certain of victory, would now be remembered less for his conquests and more for the disastrous campaign that marked the beginning of the decline of Persian ambition in the West. The Persian retreat, while not the end of the empire, was the end of an era of unchecked Persian expansion, and it forever reshaped the course of history in the Mediterranean world. With the defeat of the Persian Empire at Salamis and the subsequent retreat of Xerxes' forces, Greece emerged as a new and formidable power in the ancient world. The Greek city-states, once fractured and constantly at odds, now found themselves united by the shared experience of defending their homeland against a common enemy. The triumph over Persia marked a turning point in Greek history, one that solidified their place as a dominant force in the Mediterranean. The Persian defeat demonstrated that, despite their small size and often limited resources, the Greeks could withstand the might of an empire that spanned continents. In the aftermath of the Persian retreat, the Greeks began to consolidate their newfound strength. The Delian League was formed, a powerful alliance of Greek city-states dedicated to ensuring mutual defense against any future Persian incursions. While Athens took the lead, emerging as the most influential member of the League, the unity of purpose provided by the alliance helped solidify Greece's military and political standing. Athens, in particular, flourished during this time, its navy having proven itself crucial in the defeat of the Persians. The city's strategic importance grew, and its dominance in the League's affairs allowed it to shape the future of Greece, both militarily and culturally. Under the banner of the Delian League, Greece began to dominate the Mediterranean. Trade routes, once threatened by the expanding Persian Empire, were now secure, allowing Greek cities to prosper and expand their influence. The success of the League was not only measured by military strength, but also by the cultural renaissance it spurred. Athens became the center of art, philosophy, and democracy, fostering intellectual and artistic achievements that would leave an indelible mark on the world. The victories at Salamis and Thermopylae not only secured Greece's survival, but also set the stage for a period of extraordinary growth and achievement. As Greece grew in strength and influence, the legacy of the Persian Wars became the foundation upon which its future was built. The unity forged in the crucible of war, combined with the military success of the Greek city-states, turned Greece into a powerhouse. While the Persian threat had been defeated, the Greeks now turned their attention inward, building a legacy of excellence in governance, philosophy, and the arts that would shape the ancient world for centuries to come. Greece's emergence as a dominant force in the Mediterranean was not only the result of its military victories, but also the result of the resilience, innovation, and cultural vitality that had been nurtured during the struggle for survival. The defeat of Persia marked the beginning of a new era, one in which Greece would define the course of history. Leonidas, though fallen at Thermopylae, would become more than just a king of Sparta. His death, alongside the 300 Spartans, would transcend the battlefield, etching his name into the annals of history as a symbol of unwavering resistance, self-sacrifice, and the valor of defending one's homeland against overwhelming odds. The legacy of Leonidas grew far beyond his leadership in battle. It embodied the spirit of defiance against tyranny, courage in the face of certain death, and an unyielding commitment to the defense of freedom. In the wake of the Greek victories over Persia, Leonidas's story would be told and retold, becoming a moral touchstone for future generations. In the decades and centuries following the Persian Wars, the memory of Leonidas and the 300 became ingrained in the cultural fabric of Greece. His courage and leadership were celebrated in literature, where poets and playwrights immortalized his stand at Thermopylae as an enduring example of Spartan discipline and heroism. Through art, his likeness was captured in sculptures and paintings, preserving the image of the king who gave his life for his people. His actions inspired generations of Greeks, reminding them of their shared strength and the sacrifices made to ensure their freedom. Leonidas was not just remembered as a warrior king, but as a moral figure who exemplified the virtues that every citizen was expected to uphold: honor, duty, and sacrifice for the greater good. The impact of Leonidas and the Spartan ethos would not be confined to the time of the Greek city-states. His legacy influenced not only Greek culture, but also the warriors and soldiers of future generations. The Spartan way of life, defined by its rigorous training, military discipline, and a relentless commitment to self-sacrifice, became an ideal that echoed throughout history. Roman legions, medieval knights, and modern military forces alike have drawn inspiration from the Spartan example. Even today, the term Spartan evokes images of strength, resilience, and a steadfast will in the face of adversity. Leonidas's death was not the end of his influence. It marked the beginning of a legend that would live on, transcending time and geography. In every era of conflict, his story would be remembered as the epitome of the warrior spirit, fighting not just for victory, but for an ideal greater than oneself. The Spartan ethos would continue to shape the way warriors thought about duty and honor, providing a model for leadership in times of crisis. As the centuries passed, The name of Leonidas would endure, not merely as the king of a small Greek city-state, but as a beacon of courage and sacrifice that would inspire all who fought for justice, freedom, and the defense of their people. The mighty Persian Empire, once the dominant force in the ancient world, would never fully recover from the disastrous invasions of Greece. Though Xerxes' retreat from the Greek mainland marked a temporary withdrawal, it was the beginning of a long, inevitable decline for the Persian Empire. The failure to subdue the Greek city-states, the defeat at Salamis, and the sacrifice of Leonidas and his warriors at Thermopylae left a deep scar on the empire's reputation. The once insurmountable Persian power had been tested, and it faltered. While Xerxes returned to Persia, humbled and broken, the impact of his failed campaigns would ripple throughout the empire for generations. In the immediate aftermath of the defeat, Persia lost its claim to dominance in the Mediterranean. Greece, united in its resistance, emerged as a new power. The Greek city-states began to form alliances that would allow them to strengthen their hold on the region, most notably through the establishment of the Delian League, which positioned Athens as a rising power. The Greek success against Persia marked the first time in centuries that an external power had successfully stood up to the empire's might. As the years went on, Persia's influence waned, and its once expansive empire started to fracture. The defeat in Greece also marked the decline of Persia's strategic ambitions. The empire had been built on military conquest, but the crushing losses inflicted by the Greeks revealed a vulnerability that Persia could not easily overcome. Over the following decades, the empire's internal struggles would grow. Revolts from within, along with its failure to expand its influence into the West, began to erode its strength. The loss of prestige from the failed invasions would never be fully reclaimed, as Persia found itself focused on putting down rebellions within its own borders rather than launching new conquests. In the long term, the consequences of Persia's failed invasion rippled across the Mediterranean world. The balance of power shifted in favor of Greece, and by the time Alexander the Great emerged, it was Greece, not Persia, that had the strength and military expertise to forge an empire of its own. Alexander's conquest of Persia was, in many ways, the final act of the empire's downfall, a culmination of the legacy of resistance that began with the Greeks' victory in the Persian Wars. The Persian Empire, once a symbol of vast power, would fade into history, its dominance extinguished by the resolve of the Greeks, who had dared to stand against the might of a titan and emerged victorious. By the end of the 4th century BCE, the Persian Empire was no longer the world power it once was. Its influence over the Mediterranean and beyond had been irrevocably shattered. What followed was a period of turmoil, as internal strife and external pressures compounded, marking the end of Persian dominance and the rise of new empires, none of which could match the grandeur and reach of the once great Persian Empire. In the wake of Thermopylae's sacrifice, new heroes emerged from the shadows of the fallen 300, each carrying the torch of defiance, resilience, and honor. The Greek people, though wounded by the loss of their beloved warriors, were not defeated. Their unity, sparked by the sacrifice of Leonidas and his men, gave rise to leaders who would shape the future of Greece. The defeat of the Persians at Salamis and Plataea signaled the end of the immediate Persian threat, but it also marked the beginning of a new phase of Greek struggle, one of internal conflict, external diplomacy, and the relentless pursuit of dominance over the Mediterranean world. Athens, empowered by its naval victories, began to cement its position as a powerful city-state. The Delian League, formed in the aftermath of the Persian Wars, was initially intended as a defensive alliance, but Athens' leadership quickly turned it into a vehicle for expansion and influence. Athens would rise to great heights, its navy becoming the most formidable in the region. Yet, with power came rivalry. Tensions grew between Athens and Sparta as their visions for Greece's future began to diverge. While Athens sought to dominate through trade and culture, Sparta remained steadfast in its military might. The Greek world found itself on the brink of another conflict, one that would see heroes from all corners of Greece rise to claim their place in history. The cycle of war and heroism continued, as Greece faced not only internal divisions but also external threats. The ambitions of the Macedonian Empire, led by Philip II, and later his son Alexander the Great, would test the legacy of Greek resilience. The heroes of the past, the warriors who stood at Thermopylae, would live on in the memories of those who would march into battle in their name. But the fight for Greek independence and supremacy was far from over. New challenges loomed on the horizon, and the story of sacrifice, war, and heroism would carry forward, not only in the minds of the Greeks, but in the pages of history itself. The Greeks' journey was one of constant reinvention. The values of honor, courage, and duty, so embodied by Leonidas and his 300, lived on in the soldiers, philosophers, and leaders who followed in their footsteps. Each new hero, whether on the battlefield, in the halls of politics, or in the minds of the people, continued the cycle of sacrifice that had begun at Thermopylae. The struggle for Greek independence, the drive for Mediterranean dominance, and the spirit of resistance against overwhelming odds remained the heartbeat of the Greek world. Even as their empire spread, the lessons of the past of courage in the face of death and the power of unity would guide them forward into a new age of glory and conquest. The hero's journey, forged in the fires of Thermopylae, continued. After the dust settled and the echoes of battle faded, Xerxes found himself haunted by the weight of his failures. The invasion that had promised to solidify his empire's dominance in the west had instead shattered his vision of grandeur. The loss at Thermopylae, though not immediately catastrophic, marked the beginning of a slow, agonizing decline for the Persian king. His military genius, once unquestioned, was now questioned by his own court. The disastrous defeat at Salamis only compounded his burden, and Xerxes found himself isolated in his palace, struggling to reconcile the man he was with the king who had led his mighty empire into ruin. In the years that followed, the Persian Empire began to falter under the strain of its failed ambitions. The once imposing forces of Persia, vast and seemingly unstoppable, began to show signs of wear. Xerxes' authority, shaken by his inability to conquer Greece, wavered. His confidence in his army, his generals, and even his own decisions gradually eroded. The glory he had once sought so desperately seemed increasingly out of reach, and the empire that stretched from India to Egypt became a shadow of its former self. Distant provinces, once loyal and obedient, began to rebel, sensing weakness at the heart of the empire. Xerxes, in the privacy of his palace, must have been confronted by the ghosts of his decisions. The loss at Thermopylae, the defeat at Salamis, and the final retreat from Greece must have left him with a sense of failure that gnawed at his soul. His grand plans for Persian supremacy in the Mediterranean had crumbled before the tenacity of a few hundred Spartans and the courage of a united Greek force. The conqueror who had dreamed of expanding his empire to unimaginable heights was left to face the reality of his limitations. History, as it always does, it remembers kings and conquerors by their successes and their failures. Xerxes' name, once synonymous with power and destiny, became inextricably linked with the defeat at the hands of the Greeks. His once mighty empire, though still vast, could never fully recover from the blow dealt by the united Greek states. As time passed, the Persian king became more of a cautionary tale, his ambition and pride leading him into overreach and, ultimately, ruin. In the end, Xerxes' regret was not just for the men who had died under his command, but for the empire that slipped through his fingers. The Persian king who once stood at the helm of a world-spanning empire was now remembered for his miscalculations, his failures, and the cracks that had begun to appear in the mighty Persian Empire. And while the empire would continue to exist for centuries, its influence was forever diminished by one man's ambition to conquer the unconquerable. In Greek culture, heroism was not merely a matter of victory, it was the purity of action, the strength of resolve, and the courage to face death in the pursuit of a greater cause. The concept of eternal glory was enshrined in the hearts of the people, woven into the fabric of their stories, their philosophy, and their very identity. The Greeks believed that to die in battle, especially in defense of one's home and ideals, was to earn a place among the gods. It was not just the victor who was remembered, but the one who stood steadfast, whose sacrifice was a beacon of courage for generations to come. The 300 Spartans, led by Leonidas, were elevated into the realm of myth and legend. Their stand at Thermopylae became the epitome of self-sacrifice, a story passed down through the centuries, immortalized in songs, poems, and sculptures. In the aftermath of their heroic death, the memory of their bravery would echo through the halls of history. Their sacrifice transcended the bounds of time, growing ever greater with each retelling. No longer mere men, the Spartans became symbols, their legacy carved into the minds of all who would listen, a living testament to the power of resolve in the face of overwhelming odds. As for Leonidas and his warriors, their final resting place was not marked by earthly graves or the confines of a battlefield. It was, instead, a place of eternal glory, a spiritual home where their valor would live on forever. In the Greek imagination, the warriors of Thermopylae were carried to the halls of Valhalla, the mythic paradise where heroes gathered after death. There, in a place free from the burdens of mortal life, they were granted the peace of immortality, honored by gods and men alike. Their names would be forever sung in hymns, their deeds immortalized in the collective memory of a people who would never forget the price of freedom. The notion of heroism that arose from their sacrifice became the cornerstone of Greek cultural identity. To be a hero was not simply to win a battle, but to face death with honor and courage. It was about standing up when all seemed lost and holding fast to the ideals of duty, loyalty, and honor. The 300, through their sacrifice, defined what it meant to be a hero in the eyes of the Greeks, and in doing so, ensured their place in the eternal halls of Valhalla. In this sense, Leonidas and his warriors were never truly gone. Though their bodies lay in the dust of Thermopylae, their souls lived on in the hearts of the Greeks, forever immortalized in myth and legend. Spartan pride was woven deeply into the very fabric of their identity. It was not simply a pride in victory or conquest, but a pride in their unwavering commitment to duty, honor, and discipline. For generations, the Spartans had embraced a way of life that revered sacrifice above all else, viewing it as the highest form of service to the state. The legacy of those who had fought and died at Thermopylae lived on in the hearts of every Spartan warrior, from the youngest recruits to the oldest veterans. To them, the sacrifice of Leonidas and his 300 was not just a moment in history, it was a living testament to the Spartan ethos, a model of how they were expected to live and die. The pride Spartans took in their ancestors' sacrifices went beyond mere remembrance. It was a living, breathing part of their daily lives, influencing every aspect of their society. Spartan military tactics and strategies were born from this deep well of pride and tradition. Each generation of warriors learned from the past, refining and adapting the methods that had proven effective in battle. The famous phalanx formation, a hallmark of Spartan military might, was the embodiment of unity and discipline. The shield wall, unbroken and immovable, represented not just tactical brilliance, but the unyielding spirit of a people who had stood together in the face of insurmountable odds. Spartan strategy was centered around an unshakable belief in their superiority as warriors. They knew that their strength lay not only in their physical prowess, but in their ability to outthink and outlast their enemies. Every move on the battlefield was calculated, every advance deliberate. Training, beginning at a young age, was brutal and relentless, ensuring that every Spartan was prepared to endure whatever challenge came their way. The warriors were forged in the crucible of constant discipline, their bodies hardened, their minds sharpened. They were taught to embrace pain, to fight through exhaustion, to stand firm, even in the face of certain death. The commitment to honor and discipline that defined the Spartan warrior's way of life was not merely a code, it was a creed. To abandon this creed was to dishonor the sacrifices of their ancestors and the legacy of their people. Each Spartan understood that their life was not their own, but a continuation of the great chain of sacrifice that had been passed down through the generations. They were the heirs to a proud tradition, one that demanded nothing less than absolute devotion to their comrades, their city, and their way of life. In the years that followed Thermopylae, the pride of the Spartan warriors remained undiminished. Their commitment to honor and discipline continued to guide them in every battle they fought. Each Spartan who took up arms carried with them the memory of those 300, their ancestors' sacrifice etched into their hearts. The pride they took in their legacy was not just a reflection of their past, it was the driving force that ensured the future of Sparta would continue to stand tall, unyielding in the face of adversity. The transformation of the 300 Spartans from real warriors to mythical figures was a slow and inevitable process, as the passage of time and the power of their sacrifice intertwined with the threads of legend. What began as the unflinching stand of a small group of men against an overwhelming foe slowly morphed into something far grander, a symbol of heroism, courage, and defiance against the impossible. As word of their sacrifice spread, so did their story, woven into the fabric of Greek culture and carried across the ancient world by poets, storytellers, and scribes. What had once been the account of a real battle became a tale too rich, too potent, to be confined to the dust of history. It became a myth, a story meant not just to remember, but to inspire. As their tale spread, it was told and retold, growing larger with each telling. The 300 were no longer just men who had fought and died. They were heroes, imbued with a greater purpose. Their bravery was no longer just a matter of martial valor. It became a representation of the ideal warrior, the embodiment of sacrifice for the greater good, for honor, and for freedom. Their sacrifice became a symbol of the strength of the human spirit, one that could rise to face even the most overwhelming of odds. They stood not only for Sparta, but for all of Greece, perhaps even for all of humankind in its struggle against tyranny. The story of the 300 spread across the ancient world, finding its way into the histories of other nations, reverberating through the courts of kings and the halls of philosophers. It was not only Greek poets who celebrated their feats, but also the cultures they had saved, who found in their courage something noble and universal. In Rome, the story of the Spartans was adopted and transformed, becoming part of the broader Mediterranean tradition. In time, it was no longer just a Greek story. It belonged to all of the ancient world. As the Roman Empire grew, so too did the legacy of the 300, their sacrifice immortalized as a symbol of martial virtue and selfless leadership. In the centuries that followed, their legacy remained etched in literature and art. As their myth became a template for heroism, artists sculpted their forms in marble, depicting them in moments of strength and resolve. Poets immortalized their sacrifice in verse, and philosophers drew lessons from their bravery. The 300 became more than just men. They became ideals. Their actions were not simply remembered for what they had done, but for what they represented. They embodied the power of the human will, the possibility of greatness when one stands firm in the face of impossible odds. The lasting power of their legacy is a testament to the enduring influence of their story. From heroes to legends, the 300 Spartans became an eternal symbol of what it means to fight for something greater than oneself, to lay down one's life in pursuit of a cause that transcends time, borders, and kingdoms. The myth of Thermopylae, born from the dust of battle, lives on, carrying the echoes of those brave warriors into the future, continuing to inspire generations to come. The legacy of the 300 Spartans extends far beyond the battlefield of Thermopylae, carrying with it a broader message of resistance against overwhelming odds that has resonated across centuries. Their courage, willingness to fight for their homeland, and commitment to honor have transcended the confines of history and entered the realm of timeless ideals. In the face of a Persian army many times their size, the Spartans stood resolute, a defiant symbol of what it means to fight, not for personal gain, but for something much greater: freedom, justice, and the preservation of cultural identity. It was this spirit of resistance, embodied in their final stand, that would reverberate through the ages, influencing nations, cultures, and movements far removed from ancient Greece. As their story spread, it began to influence others who found themselves in the face of insurmountable forces. The 300 became a model for those who resisted tyranny, imperialism, and oppression. In the centuries following Thermopylae, their legend would inspire soldiers, leaders, and revolutionaries from diverse backgrounds. The spirit of the Spartans served as a powerful rallying cry for resistance against foreign invaders, oppressive regimes, and authoritarian rule. From the Roman Empire to the battlefields of the French Revolution, and later in the struggles for independence around the world, the idea of standing firm against overwhelming forces took root in the collective consciousness of many cultures. The story of the 300 was not just about military strategy or combat prowess. It was about the unyielding resolve to face seemingly insurmountable odds and to make a stand for something larger than oneself. In the face of certain death, they chose to fight for their values, for their people, and for the future of their civilization. This message of unwavering courage has inspired countless movements, from the defenders of liberty in ancient times to those who have fought against oppression in more modern history. The Spartan sacrifice became a powerful metaphor for the strength of the human will, showing that even in the most desperate of situations, one can find honor and dignity in defiance. The spirit of the 300, their courage, and their sacrifice has continued to serve as a symbol of defiance and bravery. Whether in the name of freedom, justice, or the preservation of identity, the image of a small group standing against an overwhelming force has remained a potent reminder of the power of resistance, the lesson of Thermopylae, that even in the face of death, one can make a difference, stand for what is right, and shape history, has become an enduring part of humanity's shared legacy. The 300 did not simply fight for Sparta. They fought for something that transcended borders and generations, their legacy of courage and defiance echoing throughout history as a guiding beacon for all those who would rise up in the name of justice and freedom. As the years passed, the events of Thermopylae and the heroism of the 300 Spartans began to be shaped and moulded by time, turning from the raw truth of battle into something far more legendary. Immortalizing real people as figures of myth carries a heavy burden, one that distorts the facts and amplifies certain aspects while obscuring others. The men who stood at the narrow pass, fighting to their last breath, were real soldiers with flaws, doubts, and humanity. Yet, as their stories spread through literature, art, and oral tradition, their actions became polished into an idealized narrative, a narrative that spoke not just of warriors, but of gods. This transformation was not a conscious effort, but the result of a human need for stories that transcend the mundane, that elevate the ordinary to the extraordinary. Over time, the actions of Leonidas and his 300 comrades became less about individuals who fought for their homeland and more about an enduring symbol of sacrifice and honor, one that every generation could interpret and reshape to fit its own struggles. The line between myth and history began to blur. The real struggle, the tactics, the political intrigues, the grim realities of facing overwhelming odds became overshadowed by a glorified image of the Spartans as the epitome of unyielding courage. Their final stand, though heroic, was one born of strategy and duty, not the boundless idealism that was later ascribed to it. Over time, it became easier to romanticize their sacrifice, to overlook the fact that they fought not out of some grand cosmic fate, but because it was the only choice left to them. The very nature of war, especially one fought with such fierce resolve, is laced with tragedy and sorrow, yet in the retelling of their story, the grief, the pain, and the death were romanticized into something purer, a symbol of the ultimate sacrifice. As the years turned into centuries, the story of Thermopylae was retold in a way that highlighted its nobility, casting the Spartans not as men facing death in the most practical of terms, but as paragons of virtue who stood against the tide of history with nothing but their swords and shields. Their actions, once a calculated defense, became a timeless metaphor for standing against the inevitable, for fighting with honor even when defeat was certain. This romanticization of their final moments made them more than mere warriors. They became eternal symbols of resistance, the embodiment of the idea that even in the face of certain doom, one can fight for what is right, and in doing so, achieve immortality. But the weight of immortality is a double-edged sword. In immortalizing the Spartans, we risk stripping them of their humanity, making them into unachievable ideals rather than real men who face the impossible with the same fear, doubt, and courage that lives in all of us. The story of Thermopylae is no longer just about a battle, it is a myth, one that inspires us to look beyond the battlefield to the ideals of honor, duty, and sacrifice that echo through history. But in that idealization, we must remember the men who fought, who bled, and who died not just as legends, but as human beings. The story of the 300 Spartans resonates deeply because it teaches more than just the valor of warriors in battle. It imparts lessons in courage, sacrifice, and leadership that transcend time and place. At the heart of their story is an unyielding commitment to something greater than themselves. In facing insurmountable odds, the Spartans demonstrated what it truly means to fight not for personal glory, but for a collective cause. They didn't fight because victory seemed possible or because they had the advantage. They fought because they believed in the worth of their homeland, in the sanctity of freedom, and in the bonds that held their society together. Their stand at Thermopylae was not just a military decision, but a moral one. They chose to make the ultimate sacrifice in the hope that their death would ignite the flame of resistance in their countrymen, a fire that would eventually lead to the downfall of the Persian Empire. The courage displayed by Leonidas and his warriors is the embodiment of standing firm when the world urges you to retreat. It is easy to be brave when victory is assured, when success is within reach. But true courage arises when the battle is already lost, when retreat is the safer option, and yet you remain resolute in your commitment to something far more important than personal survival. The 300 didn't win the battle at Thermopylae, but their courage was not defined by the outcome of that day. Their courage became a timeless symbol of the strength it takes to stand firm in your beliefs, even when the path forward seems impossible. The sacrifice of the Spartans serves as a haunting reminder of what it means to place the greater good above one's own life. They did not act in self-interest, but for the protection of their families, their cities, and their future generations. In a world where individual gain is often placed above collective welfare, the story of Thermopylae teaches us the power of selflessness. Their actions ask us to reflect on what we are willing to give up for the things we hold dear, and how far we are willing to go to defend those who rely on us. Leonidas, as their leader, exemplified the qualities that every great leader must possess: the ability to inspire and lead by example, the resolve to act when others falter, and the wisdom to know when to sacrifice for the sake of a higher cause. His leadership was not about commanding from the rear, but about leading from the front, showing his warriors that even in the face of certain death, There was honor and purpose in standing for what is right. The moral of the 300 is a timeless one. It is not about fighting in vain, but about fighting for what you believe in, no matter the cost. It reminds us that the ultimate sacrifice may not always bring immediate rewards, but it creates a ripple effect, inspiring others to rise and continue the struggle. In the end, it is not the battle that defines the warrior, but the courage to fight with honor and the willingness to sacrifice everything for the greater good. The story of the 300 Spartans transcends its historical roots, becoming a beacon of heroism and sacrifice that continues to shape future generations. Their stand at Thermopylae serves as a reminder that true courage is not defined by the certainty of success, but by the willingness to act in the face of insurmountable odds. This narrative of selflessness and determination reverberates across time, influencing not just those who lived in ancient Greece, but every society that values sacrifice, integrity, and unwavering resolve in the pursuit of a higher cause. In today's world, the lessons of the 300 resonate powerfully, reminding us that heroism is not always about grand gestures or battlefield victories. It can be found in everyday acts of courage, the decision to stand up for what is right, even when it's unpopular, to protect the vulnerable, or to fight for ideals in a world that often seems indifferent to them. The Spartans' willingness to fight for their homeland, despite knowing they would not survive, mirrors the kinds of sacrifices that continue to define the character of modern heroes. It is the selfless actions, driven by honor and duty, that continue to be celebrated in the stories of those who stand for justice, integrity, and freedom. Whether on a battlefield or in the halls of power, the values of duty, discipline, and loyalty embodied by the Spartans have left an indelible mark on how societies view the role of the individual in the greater collective. The emphasis on personal sacrifice for the common good is as relevant now as it was then. Whether in times of war or peace, the willingness to put aside personal desires for the benefit of others remains a cornerstone of what it means to live with purpose. The 300 sacrifice was not just a singular moment in history, it was a commitment to something larger than themselves, a commitment that inspired those who followed them and continues to inspire people around the world, even in a modern context where the battles fought may look different, but the principles remain the same. As generations pass, the story of the 300 evolves, but its core values endure. It teaches us that sacrifice is not an act of futility, but one of profound meaning. The willingness to give one's life for the greater good, to stand firm against tyranny, and to lead by example are ideals that persist through the ages. The legacy of the 300 is not confined to the past, but lives on in the actions of those who choose to fight for a cause greater than themselves. In every corner of the world, the spirit of the 300 lives on, reminding us that heroism is timeless, and that the sacrifices of today will inspire the generations of tomorrow. The spirit of the 300 Spartans endures far beyond their final stand at Thermopylae, continuing to resonate in modern-day warriors. Their courage, loyalty, and unflinching resolve in the face of certain death have transcended time, leaving an indelible mark on those who serve in defense of their nations today. The 300 sacrifice serves as a constant reminder of the highest ideals a warrior can embody: discipline, honor, and an unyielding commitment to the cause. These virtues, forged on the battlefield centuries ago, are still revered and instilled in the training of soldiers across the world. In the military world, the legacy of the 300 is woven into the fabric of modern tactics and strategies. Their disciplined approach to battle, their ability to hold a narrow pass against overwhelming odds, and their mastery of the phalanx formation are still studied and revered in military academies today. The Spartan ethos of strength through unity, where the success of the individual is bound to the success of the group, directly influences contemporary military tactics. Modern soldiers are taught the importance of cohesion, the reliance on one another for survival, and the understanding that every action, no matter how small, plays a vital role in the greater mission. Much like the Spartans, modern warriors are trained not just to fight, but to do so with an unshakable commitment to the team and the cause, regardless of the personal cost. The story of the 300 also profoundly impacts soldiers who face overwhelming odds in battle. The enduring image of the Spartans, standing firm against a vast Persian army, offers both inspiration and a blueprint for resilience. In the face of adversity, it is the memory of this heroic sacrifice that soldiers hold on to, reminding them that valor and honor are not determined by the size of the enemy, but by the strength of one's resolve. When soldiers find themselves on the brink, facing seemingly insurmountable challenges, the spirit of the 300 can be a source of strength, reminding them that it is not the victory, but the fight itself that defines them. In every conflict where soldiers are called to face impossible odds, the legacy of the 300 lives on. Their example is not just about physical courage, but about the deeper, more enduring spirit of sacrifice for the greater good. This spirit transcends the battlefield, inspiring all who hear their story to live with courage, to serve with honor, and to face the impossible with the unshakable belief that their fight, no matter how hard, is worth it. The 300's sacrifice continues to influence and guide those who follow in their footsteps, reminding them that true warriors are not defined by victory alone, but by the strength of their character and the courage of their actions. The story of the 300 Spartans at Thermopylae, while deeply rooted in history, has transcended its historical origins, evolving into a mythic narrative that continues to captivate the imagination. The battle itself, with its extraordinary display of courage and sacrifice, becomes more than just a military engagement. It transforms into a symbol of defiance in the face of insurmountable odds. Over time, the events of Thermopylae have been distilled into a timeless tale of heroism, where the human elements of fear, doubt, and vulnerability are overshadowed by the relentless pursuit of honor and duty. What began as a real, grueling confrontation on the fields of Greece has, through the process of retelling, become a mythic foundation for countless generations. The transformation from history to myth is a natural evolution for such stories, particularly those that stir something deep within the human psyche. As each retelling of Thermopylae passes through the filter of time, the Spartan stand is painted in broader strokes, emphasizing their virtues of bravery, discipline, and unity. The gritty details of the battle itself, the sweat, the blood, the sounds of clashing weapons, give way to larger-than-life figures, warriors who stood like statues against the tides of fate, fighting not just for survival, but for the eternal glory that would come from their actions. This shift from historical fact to mythological framework is aided by the human tendency to elevate the extraordinary, transforming the soldiers into archetypes of all that is noble in humanity. Thermopylae is remembered and retold through the centuries, its story passed down through literature, art, and oral traditions. Each retelling serves to reinforce the legend, with each generation finding its own meaning in the tale. For the ancient Greeks, the heroism of Leonidas and his men became a clarion call for future resistance, a symbol of the necessity of sacrifice for the survival of civilization. In the Renaissance, as Western cultures looked back on their classical roots, the story of Thermopylae was reimagined as an idealized image of the warrior ethos. And even in modern times, with books, films, and popular media, the myth of the 300 remains as powerful as ever, a touchstone for narratives of resistance and self-sacrifice. The myth-making process is one that shapes and reshapes the past to fit the needs and values of the present. The facts of the battle, the number of soldiers, the exact strategies used, the final outcome matter less than the universal themes of courage and honor that the story conveys. The 300 are not just soldiers, They have become legends, their names synonymous with the very concept of standing against overwhelming adversity. In this mythic form, their bravery is undying, forever etched in the minds of those who hear their story. The 300 of Thermopylae, in their journey from history to myth, have transcended the limitations of time, becoming a beacon of inspiration and an enduring symbol of what it means to fight not for glory, but for something far greater. The Battle of Thermopylae, though fought more than 2 millennia ago, continues to echo through modern military strategies. The lessons of the 300 Spartans, facing an overwhelmingly larger Persian force, are not only a reflection of ancient heroism, but also a timeless blueprint for modern warfare. Thermopylae's relevance persists in its demonstration of how even the smallest of forces, when motivated by discipline, strategy, and unity, can defy the odds and achieve victory. In today's world, where military operations often revolve around asymmetric warfare, where smaller, highly trained forces confront vastly superior enemies, the spirit of Thermopylae is alive and well. Modern military strategists often look to Thermopylae for insight into the power of terrain, the significance of tactical preparation, and the importance of maintaining morale in the face of defeat. The Greeks chose to fight in a narrow pass, where their phalanx formation could be most effective, neutralizing the Persian cavalry's advantage. This tactical use of terrain is still a key principle in contemporary warfare. Special forces and irregular units often rely on ambush tactics or fighting on terrain that minimizes the technological superiority of their larger adversaries. The lesson learned from Thermopylae, that choosing the battlefield can be as important as the troops themselves, is still a cornerstone of modern military planning. The story of the 300 also profoundly influences today's warriors, particularly in how they view sacrifice, leadership, and camaraderie. In every branch of modern military service, the concept of fighting for something greater than oneself is instilled in soldiers from day one. Just as Leonidas inspired his men with his leadership and courage, so too do modern military leaders take up the mantle of ensuring their troops are motivated, focused, and willing to face the unknown. The 300's unwavering loyalty to their cause, to their comrades, and to their nation mirrors the bond that exists in military units today. Whether facing the uncertainty of combat or the overwhelming size of the enemy, today's soldiers, much like the Spartans, are taught that the greatest strength lies not in numbers, but in resolve. Moreover, the timeless relevance of small forces overcoming larger ones continues to be a recurring theme in modern warfare. Throughout history, insurgents, special forces, and underdog military units have used the principles demonstrated at Thermopylae to level the playing field. Whether it's the Viet Cong against the US, the Army during the Vietnam War, or the guerrilla tactics employed by smaller factions in modern conflicts, the myth of the 300 continues to serve as a reminder that with the right strategy, even the smallest force can have a monumental impact. The Battle of Thermopylae endures not just as a moment in history, but as a living testament to the enduring power of courage, unity, and tactical brilliance against overwhelming odds. Its lessons are as vital now as they were then, shaping the warriors of today and tomorrow. The story of the 300 Spartans has transcended the boundaries of history to become an enduring symbol of courage, sacrifice, and defiance. Over the centuries, the tale of their last stand at Thermopylae has been immortalized in various forms of popular culture, from literature to modern film, and continues to inspire contemporary storytelling. The visual imagery of the Spartan warriors, clad in bronze armor and holding their shields in defiance against an overwhelmingly large enemy, has made a profound impact on how we perceive heroism. Modern films, particularly the 2006 blockbuster 300, have brought the legend of the Spartans to life for a new generation. This film, with its stylized depiction of the battle, brought Thermopylae to the forefront of global consciousness. The exaggerated, almost mythical portrayal of Leonidas and his warriors, paired with visually striking imagery, transformed the historical event into a larger-than-life narrative of defiance against tyranny. Although the film took artistic liberties, it did so in a way that captured the emotional essence of the battle, emphasizing the heroism, determination, and sense of brotherhood among the Spartans. The iconic imagery of the 300, often depicted with their shields raised high in the face of certain death, remains a powerful symbol of resistance against overwhelming odds. Beyond film, the legend of the 300 has been woven into the fabric of modern literature and comics. Authors and graphic novelists have drawn inspiration from the Spartans' stand, creating works that celebrate their bravery. The graphic novel 300, which was the basis for the film, is a stark, visually arresting retelling of the battle. Its success has sparked a wider interest in graphic novels that blend historical events with a stylized, larger-than-life approach. The narrative of the 300 has influenced storytelling in various mediums, often used to illustrate themes of resistance, personal sacrifice, and the power of a united, determined group against overwhelming forces. The influence of Thermopylae also extends to contemporary storytelling in other forms. The 300 Spartans have been incorporated into video games, historical fiction, and even political discourse, often as symbols of bravery and resistance. In a world that continues to face struggles of power, oppression, and resistance, the 300 serve as an evergreen metaphor for standing up against seemingly insurmountable odds. The ideals embodied by Leonidas and his warriors resonate with people seeking strength in their own struggles. Whether personal or collective, the legend of the 300 endures because it taps into the universal human themes of sacrifice, duty, and honor. Their story has found a place in modern popular culture, not only as a historical event, but as a narrative that speaks to the timeless values of courage, brotherhood, and defiance. As long as the world faces challenges and threats, the myth of the 300 Spartans will continue to inspire, reminding us that even in the face of certain defeat, heroism can carve out its place in history. The eternal glory of the 300 Spartans remains etched into the annals of history, transcending the battle at Thermopylae to become a symbol of ultimate sacrifice and unwavering bravery. These men, chosen from the finest warriors of Sparta, stood not just as soldiers but as embodiments of a culture steeped in valor and discipline. Their selflessness in the face of certain death, their refusal to bow before the Persian king, and their determination to defend their land and way of life have elevated them to a place among the greatest heroes and martyrs in history. In the pantheon of heroes, the 300 are unmatched in their singular devotion to the Spartan ideal of arete excellence, courage, and virtue. Unlike the kings and generals who command armies and live to see victory, the Spartans embraced the warrior's code without hesitation, knowing that their deaths would mark a moment in history that would inspire generations to come. Leonidas, their leader, stood not just as a king, but as a figure of moral authority, leading by example and uniting his men in a collective mission that transcended the battle itself. His words, his spirit, and his unwavering determination have immortalized him as one of the greatest figures in military history. His legacy as a leader and symbol of sacrifice, reverberating long after the last shield was raised. The 300 sacrifice has resonated through history, inspiring countless generations to reflect on the values of honor, duty, and loyalty. In both ancient and modern times, their stand has been invoked as a call to courage against tyranny and oppression. They represent the ideal that even in the face of overwhelming odds, a determined few can defy the expectations of history and leave behind a legacy that lasts far longer than any empire. Their actions at Thermopylae became not just a military maneuver, but a moral act, one that has transcended the battlefield and influenced philosophical thought, political ideologies, and cultural expressions across millennia. The continued legacy of the 300 is evident in the many ways their story is told, retold, and reinterpreted in literature, art, and film. They serve as both a reminder of the past and a symbol for the future, showing that sacrifice for a greater cause is never in vain. No matter how seemingly insignificant the individual or the army, their legend lives on as a beacon of hope for those who face adversity, a reminder that the strength of will and spirit can be just as powerful as the might of armies. Today, the 300 stand not only as warriors, but as enduring symbols of human resilience and courage. Their glory, forever etched in the pages of history, continues to echo in the hearts of those who value honor, bravery, and sacrifice above all else. The eternal legacy of the Spartans reminds us that even in death, heroism can achieve immortality, casting a long shadow across the sands of time.